Okay, welcome everyone. This is Wednesday, August 25th at 6:30 for a regularly scheduled select board meeting. My name is Roger Arnold. I am in Tracy Hall, joined by our town manager, Herb Durfee, and CATV is here as well. We have Claudette Brochu, Marcia Calloway, Mary Lane, and Rob Gear joining us remotely. Great. I think the first item on the agenda is the approval of the agenda. I would like to say that for number 9, I think I was in our agenda setting. I think I was unconsciously or unintentionally narrow. I think we want an update on the interim town manager process, but I think I also want a little bit of a discussion on the long-term town manager search, because I had done some work on that as authorized at our last meeting by this group. So I guess if we could add an update on interim town manager process as 9A, and then perhaps as 9B, update on town manager recruitment process might be good. Okay, I'm seeing some nods. Any other thoughts on the agenda other than that? Go ahead, Marcia.
Consistent with Bree's request previously, perhaps we want to move number 8 up on the agenda so she doesn't have to wait as long.
Yeah, I really appreciate that actually. And Bree is here and she acknowledged that that she appreciated the time. Bree, would you like it earlier than where it is now, or because we can certainly maybe switch it with, we can move 6 after 7 and 8.
So after number 5?
Yeah, so we can do number 5 and then we can begin with number 7 and then go to 8, and then the financial reports can come right before our break. So yeah, we could do that.
Thank you.
Okay, so great. So even better. So thank you, Marcia. So now we are reordering the agenda so that way the financial reports comes last before the break, and we have added a 9B to include an update on the town manager recruitment process. So if there's nothing else, can someone move for those changes? Go ahead, Claudette.
I move to approve the agenda with the amendments as noted.
Great. Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, made by Claudette, seconded by Marcia. All in favor, please raise your hand. Mary, we're approving the agenda. I don't know if Mary is finishing a cup of conversation due to a family emergency that she's working on. So I'll just give her a little bit of a second. I think she's finishing up. Okay, Mary, we're approving the agenda. So I said all in favor. Okay, great, unanimous. Thank you, Mary. Okay, next is public and select board comments. Any comments from the public for items not on the agenda? And to participate via Zoom, you can raise your hand on the bottom. And if you're on phone, please press star 9. It's been a while. Star 9.
Star 9 is the hand.
Star 9 is the hand, yes. Okay, not seeing any public comments. Are there any select board comments? Okay. Let's move on to the consent agenda. So when we approve the consent agenda, we are receiving correspondence, approving the AP warrants, and approving past meeting minutes. And if we wanted to discuss anything substantially, we typically pull. Go ahead, Marcia.
I'd like to pull the AP warrant.
Okay. Anybody want to pull correspondence or anything else? Because we could move to approve the consent agenda and just have a discussion of the warrants in that motion as well. Claudette, do you have anything?
No.
Okay, so would someone like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda, and we can discuss the AP warrants in the discussion of that approval if people feel comfortable with that? Otherwise, I'll take any other motion.
I move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
For a second. Okay, made by Claudette, seconded by Rob. Any discussion? Marcia, did you have a discussion on the AP warrants?
Oh, sorry, yes, I do.
Okay.
I had questioned before Becky Grammer as finance director appearing here. And now I'm seeing an acting town manager signing for the town manager who's still here. And I won't be able to sign that. As you know, there's requirements for qualifications. A manager has to be selected with, reference to education, training, experience, and all of that. And as we now know from the VLTC, we have to have a credit check of town managers. So until those things are done, I can't sign something. And we still actually do have Herb here.
Okay, in this instance, I believe it was more of an acting town manager situation because Herb was away taking his kiddo to college, and Rod signed on his behalf. Is there any further explanation, Herb, that you would like to offer?
Yeah, under my particular contract, I'm authorized to appoint a person in my absence. Rod serves in that absence, so his signature is perfectly legal in this instance. And again, as I was out of town, I could not sign off on things.
Go ahead, Marcia.
Can you do it now?
Would you like to
Yeah,
sign our warrant?
I'm happy to do that now, sure.
Thank
Okay.
you.
So,
we
so
just-
right. Go ahead.
Can we
Go ahead,
also
Marcia.
address the finance director position? I mean, we have a finance director and Becky has a position, and all I'm asking is that if years from now, people look back at these, they see the reality of what situations were, and that's not the reality.
Yeah, it's the standard format that's been put in there with Becky preparing it. That's usually what that signature's for. So I understand what you're saying. Yeah. I just didn't get to it from the last meeting.
Okay, but in terms of your concerns, Marcia, this to me sounds legally sound at the moment because he made
Right.
an appointee. Okay,
He'll sign it.
and plus he'll sign it just for,
I'll change your.
Right.
and he'll change the title. So
Thank you.
all concerns are there. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, is there all in favor of approving the consent agenda? Please raise your hand. Rob, okay, yes, unanimous, thank you. Okay, so next is the town manager report. Update on significant happenings. When I met with Herb on Tuesday, I said that he had a significant happenings listed on his prior town manager report, and it would be great if we could get an update on all of these items. And then I think as part of this agenda item, Claudette wrote to Herb and asked for some updates as well. So if Herb doesn't touch on these, I'll be sure to ask so we can get some of that out there as well. So go ahead, Herb, take it away, please.
So basically on the side of personnel, we remain without, we have a vacant equipment operator position. That will remain open until filled. At this point, we've not seen any applications. With regard to working foreman, we finalized the basically what I call weaving it into the contract. So the job description is fully recognized by the union. Despite the fact that I think that's management's sole right, at least we got it through the process. There was a deadline for an internal application process that has closed. There will be an appointment to the working foreman position before the end of the week. With regard to the DPW director position that's vacant, I've been interviewing all day today and part of yesterday with a team. Based on the input so far from the team members that did the interviewing, we seem to have consensus on that. So it's likely that I'll have an appointment for DPW director by the end of the week. We still have to check on some references and all that. So there'll be further, update before I head out with regard to that. But that stands to be really good news.
Herb, sorry to interrupt, can you just, and I can also wait until the end, but just on that, can you review the applications, but you also put together a little bit of a team on this? Can you just share it with us?
Sure. Correct. So after going out for advertising, we received back the number of candidates. We opted to interview 4 candidates. The review team is made up of me, Cito from Two Rivers Ottaquechee, who is the senior planner there with a focus on transportation, who deals very directly with the director on many occasions, specifically a lot of the grants that we get. Also, we had Masaki Chouette, who's the assistant and will be working most directly with the director. We also had Rod Francis, who's the planning and zoning person that deals a lot with the DPW, specifically with regard to developments, but also is going to be at least serving some level of interim measure. And so I wanted to make sure that he was on board. And then, so that's been the review team. Again, we had we had 4 interviews that took up most of today and a little bit of yesterday. The review team met immediately afterward. There's some additional follow-up that we'll do, including checking on some references and doing the appropriate background check. With the idea that there will at least be, my anticipation is that there will be at least a conditional offer of employment made before the end of the week.
Thank you.
And just to follow up, if it turns out that right now the preferred candidate doesn't pan out for whatever reason, we've all agreed that we would need to re-advertise. Okay.
Thank you.
So that's the Public Works Director, the Finance Director. I can't remember if I reported at the last meeting or not, but Fielding Assessna, who will be the new Finance Director, was able to move up his schedule a little bit. So he'll actually be, his first day will be September 7th, but in person. So that's moved up almost a full month from when he originally was able to start in person, even though the start date is about the same. So I think, so that bodes well, I think, for the town as well, and having that. There are a number of updates that I provided through my response email to Claudette's questions earlier today. Part of that relates to the onboarding of both of the directors that I just mentioned, the finance and the public works director. I've tried to, obviously I haven't been able to do anything with the director position yet, but certainly with the finance director, I've been in touch with Fielding a number of times. Becky has been in touch with him back and forth. We've tried to get him initially set up with Nemrick to be able to train on some of the Nemrick stuff. Cynthia Stoddard from Nemrick will be available to him once he's more formally on board as well to go through a lot of the higher functions that he needs to understand with regard to Nemrick, as well as the town. Becky will be cross-training him, as I use the term, in everything that Becky deals with regard to Nemrick, which is predominantly the accounts receivable, the tax module, as well as the general ledger and the payroll. So there will be some sort of in the field on-site type training that will go on. So that's the initial sort of onboarding that's going on. I've also made myself available to him if he has particular questions after I leave, just so that he and I can help Miranda in finding any files or what have you that are needed, such as the personnel file that I created that plays into the budget process, like when we get the CPI adjustment and all that. So I think at least, despite my contract expiring shortly, that there's been a good effort to onboard as much as I possibly can, but admittedly, the additional onboarding will not fall on my shoulders in terms of responsibility. Generally, this, with regard to the DPW director, onboarding will occur a lot with Masaki, who is very good with regard to the budget process. She's picked up on that very well in terms of the day-to-day budgeting. So she will work in tandem with that person. With the appointment of the working foreman, that person is already a long-term standing person working within the department and can keep the guys working with regard to our workload, but also at the same time updating that person in terms of the nuances of what goes on in the department. But again, I won't have the luxury, if you will, or the opportunity to sort of onboard from the manager's perspective. But again, I'll be available to that person and trying to help them find things that can't be found. I will say that Larry left the office in really good shape in terms of things that, for instance, when we normally bid something, he left a nice calendar of that will pop up, say a year from now, that says, hey, you need to go out to bid for winter sand and gravel, things along those. And then a pretty good setup is filing as you would expect any engineer to do. So I think that, and Masaki's familiar and has access to that. So I think that will be a pretty good start for that particular person. But again, that will fall to the responsibility of those after I leave. Is that the only part? I'm just trying to think. Personnel has been such a, I think that's it for personnel. The police here remains status quo with regard to the police chief. You currently have the interim police chief with Simon Keeling. That we still remain unable to find at least a temporary police officer to sort of fill the role while you folks continue to have your discussions on the policing and police department.
And Herb will let that RFP before he leaves. I need to make the edits that were amended at our last meeting, and I'll hand that off to his office before he does that, and that will happen ASAP.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So in meeting, Roger and I have coordinated on that. So
yeah.
I don't, unless Claudette, you think it might be good to highlight any additional things in the response email back for members of the public. I'll sort of let that stand, but I'll let you raise any of those particular questions if you have that from that standpoint. But I'm just going to move on for a second from that. That just today, I received an email that's a ARPA update with regard to our funds. I'm still a little shell shocked from what I read, if it's actually true. But the allocations for the county, let me back up for a second. There are allocations that local communities have been specifically allocated. If you may remember, that was something like $367,000. Well, let me get it right here before I say it wrong. So we've been allocated the direct amount from the federal government of I'm going to round up, $357,000. We've already received the first of two payments on that of $178,000. That sits in a separate accounted for fund in overall in our general ledger and general fund, but still a separate fund. We will receive the other half of that next year around the same time frame. Today, there is an additional amount of money that is being allocated by the feds that in most states is being funneled to municipalities through the county form of government. As you know, in New England, we don't have a county form of government. So what has happened with people like Senator Leahy and Peter Welch that have been helpful for Vermont, states like us, they're a little bit different than the balance of the states, that if I understand it, it's additional money that will directly come to municipalities from the feds, but again, through a state, with the state as an intermediary. If I understand correctly, that total amount today that I understand is $662,000. Half of that, it would be done in two payments. Half of that would be $331,000. That's again, a little bit starstruck for me from that standpoint, because I was making sure that was not just an amount that was allocated to Windsor County as a whole. And when you look at the information I sent in the email, it was a Vermont League of Cities and Towns email that I just forwarded to you late today. And you click on it, you can go to the county allocation, go to the allocations. And if you look at any other town, say in Windsor County, they're all different numbers. So this is something I'm actually thinking that you're receiving effectively just over $1 million total from ARPA funds, whether through the two different sources that are out there. The recommendation that still comes forward with regard to what's in the email is that the final guidelines are not out yet. The Vermont League of Cities and Towns is recommending municipalities do not do anything with those funds other than what we've done, which is to put them in a separate account for the moment. In the interim of the feds putting out the guidelines that will ultimately be under the umbrella of the 4 or 5 major categories, that the select board solicit public comment in terms of where the funds should be spent. Again, under those 4 or 5 broad categories, but do not spend the money until the federal guidelines have further created themselves. So that's really, unless I'm wrong, that's really good news.
Some virtues in not having county government, I guess.
So correct. So there may be, my guess is that there may be some level of different kind of criteria that may go with each. That is the local direct, and still local direct, but via what was supposed to be a county way. I think it will still be those broad categories, but there may be 2 different sets of categories that you have to look at ultimately in terms of the specificity of criteria. So I know I won't be here, but I would just throw caution to the wind to make sure that even it may be even worthwhile to have a separate fund account for this new county money, so that you're not commingling the 300,000 with the 600,000, that you still keep those separate in case there are separate guidelines from that. I'm just shooting from the hip on that, but again, to ensure proper accountability of this kind of change, it may be advisable.
Okay.
I will just say in general, I've had since the last meeting, just this week, I've had my last department head meeting to kind of go through expectations of different department heads, to further explain how my desk will be left, the password and all that type of information will remain. As I said, it'll be information will be given to Miranda with access by Rod. At some point, you'll need to change that information. And even when any new person comes on board beyond Rod, again, it should be, things should probably change again. If you go forward tonight with the IT recommendation, most likely as we bring that process to implementation, there'll be requests of the IT managed care services for everybody to change their passwords and all that. I've already told and instructed Becky to update the NEMRIC passwords because we have, for instance, the Robert Half contract dropping off, fielding assessment coming in. So just trying to keep that process up to date as we move forward. It's been, and then the only other thing I would just say, it's trying to do the full implementation of what I wanted to do. Is I'm still striving to do it, but it has been difficult because I have received public requests for information related to our OML lawsuit, which I have to statutorily address and take care of. By not having a public works director, I'm kind of serving in tandem with with an individual up there to make sure that public works is running as efficiently as possible. So again, certain circumstances have taken away, my full attention on trying to get things in order to go out the door, but I'm trying to keep things in as much order as I possibly can.
Okay. Thank you, Herb. Claudette, do you have any clarification questions?
Just, maybe just a couple.
Sure.
I know the deadline, the previous deadline to submit budget material was September 1. I'm just wondering which departments have complied to date and which are still outstanding.
So the original calendar talked about submittals of capital budget in the September timeframe, and the operational budget is in the October timeframe. At this point, I have not received information from department heads with regard to capital budget information, and obviously the deadline is still some time away with regard to, excuse me, yes, the operational is sometime away in October, and we're still not at the deadline yet for the capital budget, but I haven't not received any submittals yet on the capital budget.
And the lack of a dashboard for the June financials, even before the end of year pre-audit material, we've not received that.
Yeah.
Right. So based on trying to get information to you, we were able to get the regular reports to you, the pre-audit fiscal year-end information, but there has not been a dashboard done for that, nor do I expect a dashboard done for that particular one, because I think that the reports themselves are the more telling with the balance sheet and the actual expenditures and revenues with regard to that. With regard to the first period, July for the fiscal year that we're now in, I just received that today. Becky had not yet closed out July and trying to finish up the previous fiscal year's information by the time the packet went out. So I just barely got the July dashboard today. I did not forward it on because I haven't had a chance to look at it to check it for accuracy, but I have just received that, and I'll get that to you before the end of the week. The dashboard for the year end, the main reason why, two reasons. I don't think you need it for the year end in terms of the perspective on it. And then because I think the reports will serve the purpose that's required, and then eventually the audit will give you the fullest information that you need for the and then for the again for the dashboard for July. Sorry, the other reason is just that John Casey's contract ends tomorrow or the next day is his last day. And the information was not yet closed out, so he hadn't had a chance to do that. I had him focus on the July dashboard to start the year off from that standpoint, which would give Fielding a starting point for the coming or the current fiscal year that we're in.
I think, and I think this is perhaps why Claudette is asking. I think, the financial dashboard was an imagined output of this contract with this consultant, right? Because reporting, transparent reporting was really important to us, and the board felt that the existing sheets from NEMRIC didn't allow for that. And so it now seems like the output of that contract will hopefully be useful to the finance director who is coming in, and it seems like we will have to lean on his office for any sort of pre-audit presentation or explanation. Is that?
I mean, essentially, right. Essentially, it's pretty easy to see that we're in a good condition with regard to the year-end report.
Okay, and you'll get to that.
As I had said that in my response back to Claudette with her particular question. Essentially, we have a fat $800,000 as our undesignated fund balance, and we ended the year out fairly well with a fund balance of about $330,000. So our position has improved since last year, and I think that's the net good news with regard to the year-end report. The nitty-gritty of the year-end report, I think, is been sloshed around a little bit due to COVID and not realizing some revenues that we thought we might with regard to rec, but on the same token, not being able to provide the kind of programs that we typically did from that standpoint. But overall, when you look at the bottom line, we did what I would call fairly well.
Okay, Claudette, you said any more points that you wanted to ask Herb, or, okay. Any other board members have questions or any discussion on the town manager report from Herb? Okay, thanks, and we'll talk a little bit more about, you touched on it, but maybe there'll be a little bit more of a discussion on the financial report agenda item. Okay, so let's move on to the Article 36 Task Force interim report. I'm gonna,
Excuse me,
sorry.
I apologize for this. This is my first select board meeting and
Sure.
I seem to miss the public comment period, even though it was here at 6:30.
Sure. So yeah, no, thank you for your question. So there's a public comment period for all items not on the agenda at the beginning of all our agendas at 6:30. And then we have estimated start and end times, estimated keyword, for all of our other agenda items. And so so if you have an agenda,
Yes. I do.
we take public comments for any item on the agenda. So, and we seem to be on time this evening.
So,
Does that help? So if you're here for the Article 36 Task Force interim report, we will take public comments following our discussion, and we were slated to begin at 7:10 and it's 7:01.
okay, but for the town forest, I have to wait to comment on that when that is brought up.
That is our procedure, yeah.
Okay, all right. That's
Sorry.
all I wanted to know. Okay,
I'm sorry about that.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I was putting, I was adding Jack Cushman, who is here to present the work of the Article 36 task force for us. Just really quickly, I just wanted to say that by August 30, the charge of the task force says that the initial work plan will be presented to this board, and that it would include, there's 4 items, one of which would be summarizing the work to date on the town's greenhouse gas emissions and provide areas of improvement for missing data, if applicable, and identify approaches to fill in that missing data. Define what constitutes a policy, program, or project that advances the directives of Article 36, provide an engagement plan for collaborating with existing committees whose scope aligns with those of the task force, and to audit their own scope of work, and to include priorities, goals, and outcomes. And so some of that Jack will be here to discuss with us. So go ahead, Jack.
Hi, everybody, and thank you for allocating this time. Roger, are you able to enable me to share a screen so that I can walk through a slideshow?
Yeah, you should be set now.
Are you able to see a slide that I'm sharing?
We do see, yeah.
Okay, so I'll do my best to walk through this. I think it'll take me about 7 minutes to present this, and then the remainder of your time will be available for questions. Consensus is a key word in the work of the Article 36 Task Force. And the report that we submitted on Monday, August 2nd, we were supposed to submit on August 1st, but it was a Sunday. That document, which you have, represents a complete consensus of all 5 members of our task force. And we went over it very carefully in our public meetings. And there's not a word in there that anybody on the task force objected to. And it's been really a very good process for us. We set out to work by consensus, and we're hoping to build that consensus through the rest of the year. I want to note that we're working in strict compliance with the open meeting law, and we're trying to do all of our work in public, although that slows us down a bit, and it involves some learning the bells and whistles of the process for those of us who are new to this. At the meeting tonight, at your meeting tonight, we have 3 members of the task force in attendance. I'm the chair, Aaron Lamperti is the vice chair, and Rob Gear is the select board's appointee. That would constitute a quorum of the Article 36 task force, but our review of the statute makes clear that nothing that we present tonight constitutes a public meeting of the Article 36 task force. This is a meeting of the select board at which we're all participating. And I want to be explicitly clear about that and make sure that nobody disagrees with that construal of the open meeting laws, because as I say, we're paying a great deal of attention to having our processes be public, transparent, and inclusive. Article 36, you're all familiar with it. It passed a town vote by about a 4-to-1 margin, and it asked the town to gradually and continually reduce our direct use of fossil fuels. And by direct use, what we intend to mean is the combustion of oil, propane, natural gas, diesel fuel, fossil fuels that are burned directly by town facilities, vehicles, and equipment. It's not secondary use. It's not indirect use. It's not economy-wide use. Dan and Witt's use doesn't count. It's the town's taxpayer-funded consumption of fossil fuels. And as one of the people who helped draft this and circulated the petition, I can say that I and the other authors of this resolution were consciously focused on direct consumption of fossil fuels. And we did that for a very clear reason that I explained at a meeting of the select board, which was it would be easy to measure. We know how much fossil fuel we buy. We want to phase it out. Our charge to the task force reflects this. It calls for an aggressive and comprehensive work plan to achieve the elimination of direct fossil fuels in the town of Norwich. And we are focused very tightly on the language of your charge to us. And we're making sure that everything we do meets the task that you assigned us. That's why we came up with this initial work plan. And as Roger mentioned, it requires 4 specific things. And I think you'll find that all 4 of these are set forth in the initial work plan that we submitted to you. It took a lot of work. I want to especially thank Aaron, the vice chair, for his supportive role in doing this and bringing his knowledge to the table. Also, Eva Rosenblum did, really heavy lifting on collecting the data that allowed us to meet your requirements in this August 1st report. All the task force members worked hard, but those 2 I want to mention. I'd just like to briefly re-emphasize our guiding principles. We work in open meetings and we make decisions by consensus. It's very important to us to hear from people in the town as we go through this process, and it will become more important in September, October, November. We want to build a town-wide consensus. It's not just that we want to have a consensus among our 5 members. We'd like to be able to come to you and say, we can present a town-wide consensus. We also respect the scientific consensus, and we're not in the business of second guessing the science. We are relying, as we set our objectives, on well-established, peer-reviewed, authoritative assessments of the urgency of this problem and that need to phase out the uncontrolled use of fossil fuels by the end of the century, beginning now. We feel that Norwich should be a leader in Vermont. And so therefore, we're keeping close track of the Vermont Global Warming Solutions Act to make sure that we're in tune with the statewide efforts. And we want this process to be orderly, feasible, and efficient. And that's so important to building consensus. As far as the science goes, I think many of you have seen me wearing my little face mask that has the global surface temperature anomaly on a decadal basis. And it shows that at the time that I graduated from Dartmouth, it was just turning from blue to pink. But the problem is on the right-hand side of this graph, you see that with the best case response globally to this problem, the best case where we do everything possible, you're still going to be getting redder and redder and redder. And the worst case at the top right corner, where we don't respond to this problem and we stay on the path that we're on, it really becomes intolerable, literally intolerable. And so we recognize the urgency of the problem, and we think there's already a consensus in Norwich that this is an urgent problem. The key messages of the IPCC are that every ton of carbon dioxide matters. That's a specific label on a graphic in the IPCC report that you read about in the newspapers over the past week or two. And this has been known since 1977. The National Academy of Sciences said that every ton of carbon dioxide matters in their 2012 report on America's climate choices. Every year matters. Every choice matters. These are the words of the authoritative IPCC, and that's the spirit in which we're doing our work. Every choice matters. So we've been tracking fossil fuel use and emissions. We've assembled a baseline as of 2019. This is Eva's work. It's clear that the lion's share of our fuel use and our emissions are in our buildings and in our fleet. There are some data gaps in fleet usage, but we think that these can be filled. And we hope that the new town manager and DPW director will focus on data training and planning. This is discussed in the task force charge, and we really encourage the select board to make this an item that's on the table as you interview candidates to be our town manager and our head of DPW. We make this recommendation early because we don't want to be 3 months from now saying you should have done this. So we're saying this early. We expect you to do this. The task force schedule is laid out in a lot of detail on pages 8 and 9 of our work plan. We're going to be meeting tomorrow to discuss our action list. These are not recommendations. They're not in priority order. It's a brainstorming. We encourage the public to add items, and we're continually adding items to our list of potential actions. We've begun a process of consultation. I myself have met with the Conservation Commission. Of course, I'm the chair of the Solid Waste Committee. Rob is on the Select Board. Aaron is chair of the Energy Committee. I went to the Energy Committee's meeting last night to make sure that we were reaching out to them. And this consultation is not for us to tell them what ought to happen. It's for them to tell us what ought to be on our agenda. We're going to be drafting potential warrant articles, policies, and other recommendations. We're going to be taking public comment on those. So far, we have not had any discussions on the task force, individually or severally, about possible warrant articles. And we want to do this in an open, public way so that there are no surprises in our recommendations to the select board. And we are presenting these findings in December. And as I'll point out to you, we're asking for specific guidance from the select board on whether this schedule meshes with your processes as you consider budget and other policies in the months ahead. So these are our questions for the select board, and we'll answer questions from you as well. Does our schedule mesh well with your budgetary and other processes? Are changes to this schedule necessary? So we've set out this schedule. We've reported to you on August 1st, and we're asking for specific feedback. And the reason is that a member of the public showed up at one of our meetings and said, I'm not sure the select board would like it if you come up with warrant articles months after they begin the budget process. And so we said to this public commenter, good point. We'll ask the select board about that. And we'll make sure that we're doing this in the appropriate ways. So these are our questions. How should we proceed in September when there may be vacancies in some of these offices? And can you give specific instructions to interim officials to help us in filling the data gaps that we see? I also want to talk about something that Herb said tonight about this, surprise money that we found in a drawer just now. There's a big wave of infrastructure finance moving through the economy. I went to a meeting of the energy committees with Bernie Sanders today, and he was really clear that there's going to be a huge wave of money coming our way. And this is in the budget reconciliation bill. It's not done yet, but he said maybe in 4 or 5 weeks, this will become law. And in the next year or two, you're going to see a lot of money. Norwich already, of course, has allocations from this money. The task force recognizes that there are a lot of competing priorities, but our sense is that climate action deserves to be among the priorities. And so we want to encourage an open process of consensus decision-making about how to spend the money. And I also have said this many times at the select board before. You should be vigilant in maximizing our opportunities to finance climate projects with federal money. This is something that hasn't happened in the past. And, this is my opinion. This is not a task force recommendation. The task force hasn't approved this slideshow. This is my slideshow. And I just think you ought to be paying attention to maximizing our opportunities. There's a line in our report that says we emphatically urge the select board to make climate action a high priority in every decision. And one of our meetings, Ernie Ciccatelli, who's on the task force from the Planning Commission, said that's the most important sentence in this document. And so I said, okay, Ernie, I'll put it in boldface, we'll really emphasize that point. And I think that it's fair to say that we all agree that not just as a conversation point, but emphatically, we want the select board to make climate action a high priority in every decision. And so therefore, I'm going to give you the heads up that as the chairman, and not speaking for the group, I'm going to be proposing for discussion a formal requirement that the town of Norwich make a climate impact statement for every significant town action with implications for our climate footprint. We want to be, it's like the National Environmental Protection Act, the landmark environmental statute called for environmental impact statements. This is a long, hard look at the climate implications of everything that we do. And I'm going to be happy to discuss this suggestion. It's not yet a recommendation of the task force, but I think this represents the view of task force members that climate action needs to be a high priority in every pertinent decision that you make. So I thank you for the time, and I and the other task force members are available to answer your questions anytime. Thank you.
Okay, stop participant sharing. Okay, do board members have questions or comments for the committee and feedback at this point for this interim report?
Just email that report too, so we can put it in the packet.
Yeah, yes, yeah. And then if you could email the presentation to Miranda Jack, so it could be part of the correspondence.
Yes, I will. Thank you.
Go ahead, Claudette. Did I see your hand or was that Mary?
No, you actually saw my hand, but I can defer to Mary if she'd like to go first.
Oh, go ahead, Claudette, please.
So Jack, we know the fleet issue is a big one in that as far as we know to date, there aren't electric or hybrid dump trucks. So how do you recommend we get around that, knowing that Green Mountain Power just did get some electric like line trucks? Do you know if there's anything coming down the pike soon?
So here's, of course, we've been thinking about this as well, and it's a very good point. So here's how I think we're going to approach it. Given that our initial work plan doesn't address specific recommendations or specifics like this, it has come up at some of our public meetings and we're well aware of the question. So what we are building is a spreadsheet that shows every single vehicle and piece of equipment in the town and what its use of fossil fuels is. And then the way I anticipate this working is that for each piece of equipment, we'll try to assess when the life cycle of that piece of equipment is expected to end. What's the shelf date on that piece of equipment? And then to try as best we can to assess when is an alternative fueled vehicle that can do that job likely to come along. And then to see if we can't make advanced plans for substituting clean vehicles for dirty vehicles at the appropriate time. And I've discussed this with Jeff Martin, the regional energy coordinator, and he pointed me to a tool that may be very helpful in us doing this work because we don't want to reinvent the wheel on every single truck in town. But we want to make use of material that's already available. I want to note that Article 36 talks about in its language an aggressive but gradual approach. And so the science takes us toward reducing emissions by a certain percent by 2030, a certain percent by 2040, a certain percent by 2050. I don't expect to be around in 2050, but I'd like to die knowing that Norwich is on the way to making those targets a reality. And it seems to me that that's plenty of time, given that, for example, Boeing is saying that they're going to have passenger jets that are sustainably fueled by 2030. I think that by 2030, 2040, we ought to be in a position of saying electric vehicles that can do the jobs of our current fossil fuel vehicles. And our goal is to set up a framework so that people who plan our budgets and expenditures have an orderly and feasible process to achieve these objectives. The objectives are not negotiable. You know, we have to stop using fossil fuels. Every responsible official or entity understands this. And so let's get about doing
Yeah.
the work.
Thanks, Jack. So Claudia, did you have your question answered?
I did, but I would also ask you as the chair to remind the public about chat.
Sure. So Claudia is alerting me to chat conversation. Generally, I leave it open because sometimes there's some administrative things that could happen if like someone's losing internet or what have you. But we don't use it to take public comment or have sustained dialogue back and forth. I'll read them into the record when the time comes. We don't do that because it's an equity of access. Not everyone is participating via Zoom right now. Okay, so Mary, did you have a question?
Yeah, well, I had a comment. I really like the just mention of projects, policies, and programs. I thought that was a useful way for a select board to think about what to do. I appreciated that. I wonder about low-hanging fruit. I know Harry Roberts has mentioned fleet management. Also, I have had like great success with my own little home lawnmower, which I changed from a gas to a electric. And I understand that the small engines are tremendously dirty, but also I don't think it's as huge an investment to replace lawnmowers and weed whackers and chainsaws as it would be a giant snowplow truck. So I'm interested in that kind of trend, that perhaps it's low hanging fruit that we could get started with. I'm also interested in battery storage instead of generators. I would like to know about that, how that could work for our all of our public buildings.
So to to summarize, Jack, like battery storage versus fossil fuel generators as a line of inquiry and as a question, and then the cost benefit analysis of fossil fuel small engine replacement to an electric fleet. That's
Right, and both of those points, and also a point that I see in the chat, are specific ideas that we are eager to include on our action list. So anybody from the public, from the select board, and of course, I'm taking notes on what Mary says, who wants to have these on our action agenda can contact us, and that's the process. We're going to take these ideas from the public and we're going to consider every idea that any member of the public comes to us. That's our process over the next 3 months.
Go ahead, Marcia. You're on mute, sorry.
I think you muted me.
I did, sorry, the papers were rustling.
Repeat offender. John, I want to commend you for basically the work that you've done, and also noting on, I think it was page 55, the work has to be for both mitigation and that we shouldn't forget adaptation. And I think that what I would, because I'm very concerned about strength, resilience, and, all of the climate threats and stuff that's happening to us. So I think personally, I would find it helpful. And before I get into the helpful, I'm also going to say I commend you for wanting to have consensus, because I strongly believe you can't get anywhere without consensus. And I'm wondering if you thought, because I've been thinking more and more about Dan Fraser's neighborhoods. Do you remember in the beginning of the pandemic, and he put together these neighborhood lists, and he had people who were sort of responsible? And I'm just wondering why we don't use that sort of structure a little bit more. And maybe it would be good to have committees like yours or task force reach out to those folks and say, can you reach out to your people? Because this is what we're doing and we're interested in getting feedback. That also builds the sort of momentum for explaining that this kind of stuff is going to be coming to fruition on warrant articles. And so, people should be involved because it's going to affect their pocketbook. Beyond that, I'm just wondering, I think one thing that's very confusing to a board is that you get stuff breaking down, you've got money issues, you're trying to figure out how to provide the services and what's available. I think in general, what I would find helpful would be a hierarchy of needs. So basically, your group looking at not only your lifespan analysis, but an adaptation hierarchy, so that we could see these are the kinds of things that you should be looking at in terms of what you should do. Maybe some of Mary's low-hanging fruit, but also these are the more urgent things, so that we could be judiciously knocking off things as we go along and not having to rebuild that wheel every time. So I don't know if long-term the task force is going to have a life that is, ongoing, or if this is going to morph into the energy committee. But I think at some level, the select board needs input from people who have the time and the expertise to look at this kind of stuff and give us meaningful information, so that when the crunch comes down and we've got 50 things going on, we can look at that list and be prepared to make a good decision.
So thank you, Marcia. And I really look forward to having the task force talk to you directly about this. I have a couple of things to say. One, when I wrote that paragraph about adaptation and mitigation, I had you specifically in mind. So I know of your interest in adaptation, and we want to encourage the select board to pay attention to adaptation and mitigation as two sides of the same coin. That said, the task force's charge is rather narrow. And so while there's a little wiggle room, and we expect to use the wiggle room to make kind of broad directional suggestions to the town in December, we are really focusing our work on the direct municipal combustion of fossil fuels, because that's what Article 36 says, and that's our charge. So we will be suggesting ways that we can broaden the agenda. And so I hear what you're saying, and I understand the importance of the broader conversation. In the next 3 months, I think we're going to be looking through a very narrow straw at our specific objectives here.
Go ahead, Claudette, and then we have 5 minutes left, and I have a couple comments, but go ahead, Claudette, and then.
Yeah, just to answer John, Jack's question specifically in one of his slides is whether or not December is too late for budgetary discussions. I would hope that if it could be early December, that would be way better than the end of December. Because we're really just starting to address the budget in December, and I know we probably all would like to see it even addressed earlier than that. So
okay, I hear that, and it's very helpful. And the one advantage to our schedule is that at least these issues will be raised for discussion early in the process. I also want to point out, both you and Marcia have kind of implied that warrant articles would be budgetary issues, but I can easily think of warrant articles that would not be budgetary, but would be policy oriented.
yeah, I don't think warrant articles all necessarily need to be budget issues.
That's right. And so I'm kind of going to be surprised if we're making specific budgetary warrant article recommendations by December. I just want to be open-minded about what's going to bubble up on our agenda here. You know, I don't think it's helpful for anybody to come without an open public process and to present a warrant article that involves spending money in January. I just don't think that's the right approach.
So, Jack, you mentioned, you know, there were some policy directives or some, you know, voter direction that can be provided to the board as advisory through warrant articles. But I think those tactics have been explored meaningfully, which is why we have an Article 36 task force. And so you should question the virtues of like having a policy oriented or an advisory article as sort of a consensus building activity. And then I think in terms of budgetary outputs, we're talking largely capital, and there is significant disruption in our government at this moment. And I can't imagine significant advanced discussions on capital will be happening, meaning the way that we would like to this year. So I think this idea of, you could say December, you can say, you know, it's, other than the fact that the world is on fire, I think those dates are arbitrary, right? So, but I think for me, we asked for a definition of a project or a pilot or what have you to get exactly at what I think Mary was touching on, which is just propose a project or a pilot that is well researched for our consideration. In the chat, Doug Wilberdine asks, what about biodiesel vehicles? Rather than always pivoting to electric, B100 fuel, less costly, and he goes on. And indeed, Montpelier had taken on the question of piloting biodiesel and obtaining it from somewhere. I think actually the jury is out on the efficacy of biodiesel, but that's an example of a potential discussion that could be brought forward for a piloting exercise, because we recognize that we're in sort of this emerging industry and an emerging moment for municipalities that have nominal resources, right? So piloting even at a regional, for a regional proposal would be helpful. So I think the task force should do that. I think fossil fuel, small engines is a great suggestion. And then adaptation is like at the community and grassroots level, as Marcia was alluding to. But I think we need, you know, I'm really curious about sort of bureaucratic dashboards these days. We were talking about our financial dashboard earlier, right? And so I'm curious about what a dashboard for fossil fuels would look like, and understanding what climate tagging looks like through a budgetary process, understanding what kind of training needs to be proposed for staffers, right? I appreciate that the task force wants to encourage us to hire someone with those backgrounds, but a big part of adaptation is that most people don't necessarily have that background. So what kind of training recommendations or innovative thinking needs to be, people need to be well-versed in order to take this on, right? So, so I think like the adaptation to me comes at the level of like needing to know these data gaps more meaningfully, and then what kind of data training or climate tagging or other ledger type activities need to be introduced to our staff. So that's all I got, these two areas.
Great. So I just want to reemphasize that when we meet tomorrow, we're going to be working on our action list. And that action list is the parking lot for all these specific ideas, which the task force has had no discussion of so far because we've been working on process.
Sure.
Starting now, we're going to be working on concrete recommendations. And Aaron is the minder of the action list. And you'll see all these ideas that have been batted around tonight will be showing up on our action list as agenda items for the next couple of months.
Okay, we'll do another round and then we'll move on if that's okay. Go ahead, Marcia.
Well, I understand that warrant articles for money might seem to be a little bit premature, but it just sort of seems to me that to make any progress, you usually have to spend some money. And it seems like anything that we're going to spend money on in this realm might be fairly costly. So it would seem to me that planning ahead with warrant articles that ask to put money away in designated funds might be something people should consider.
Yeah, good point. And at one of our public meetings, when this question of the timing of warrant articles that had a budgetary impact came up, and was it too late to influence the cycle? My response is I could envision a warrant article which might imply spending money in a future year. And that's perfectly possible. I want to reemphasize that the task force has had no discussions among ourselves about any warrant articles so far. And we really want the public to be in the room when we have those discussions.
Yeah, and I'm a little saucy on warrant articles because around this time last year, we heard a suggestion of a warrant article, then subsequently got recoiled, right? Or reverted or whatever the legal term is. And obviously a global pandemic happened in between there. Obviously it passed by a small margin, but I think, you talked about consensus earlier. I would say there's a lot more recognizing that, we're in dire straits. I think there's a lot more work product that needs to be brought forward before we start talking warrant articles. But I think Marcia's point is well taken. Like there's talk and then there's money, right? And money is what's going to be significant. But I think you appreciate the point. Go ahead, Mary, and then Claudette, and then we should move on.
Just a note of irony, the local and county ARPA allocation is similar to this scale of money needed for installing geothermal at Tracy Hall. Just saying.
Right. Go ahead, Claudette.
Yeah, and just as another issue to consider is reduction of non-permeable surfaces around town.
Mm.
I know that Trails is looking at some stuff, and if we can just reduce or eliminate non-permeable surfaces in the areas that we can. That's my final thing, and I thank the task force for their report. Very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, I know you're on this committee, so this report is your work product as well, but do you have any, would you like to, I want to give it some space if you have anything to add.
The thing that has impressed me most
Jack and Aaron are spearheading, and Eva also are spearheading a lot of the work. The thing that has impressed me most about what they've been working on is the true factor of inclusivity and wanting to hear from everyone and not shutting it down anyone prematurely because of prejudicial ideas. So I have yet to work with a committee or a task force that has been that comprehensive in their solicitation of everybody's idea.
That's great. Thanks, Rob. Aaron Lemperty, do you have a public comment?
Well, I'm not sure if it's public comment or as a comment as vice chair of the committee, but
Okay.
in terms of the discussion of budgetary impact and warrant articles, I would like to point out, and maybe this is more of a public comment, that you as the select board don't have to wait for our report to take action on Article 36. You could very well go ahead and get started now on anything you think you might want to do in the next year or two that has budgetary impact and put it on your budget. We are not driving the process, really. We're only going to come up with an advisory report. You are the leaders. You can make choices now and get stuff done. So, and I encourage you to. Thank you.
Yes, who animates whom? Yes. Thanks, Aaron. Any other board member comments before we move on? With appreciation to everyone for all of this, for this care and this work. Go ahead, Marcia.
I just reiterate, I like some guidance, and I think it's helpful if we have, you know, as much input from people who've really been looking at this so that we make good choices, because we could make choices about things, but it might not be the best or most efficacious thing.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Marcia, because I think the task force in some ways was our action to hear more from a committee and all the consensus building that you're doing so we can be better. So yeah, thank you, Marcia, for that feedback. Okay, so we should move on, right? Hopefully this was helpful to our task force.
Yes, thank you all.
Thank you.
Okay, so next we have the facilities memorandum of understanding between SAU 70 and the town of Norwich. So the action is board will be asked to approve the MOU and that a motion will be required. So I have a new MOU, which the one in the packet is not the one we are going to be asked to approve. And so I can share that on my screen. So because we've had the benefit of the chat, I imagine, or I believe that folks are here to sort of advocate or speak for the importance of the town forest or the Milt Fry nature area in the curriculum for their children. I don't necessarily think that is the subject of our discussion this evening. We are being asked to approve an MOU that makes use of an exchange of spaces. So the MOU will allow certain access to the classrooms for the use of rec programs in exchange for access to the town-owned Milt Fry area, the nature area, and the accessible trail itself may be, and its financing is perhaps a future conversation, but my understanding from the latest from Bruce Swenson is we're not necessarily discussing that particular aspect this evening. So I'm going to put the draft on my screen and then I'm going to actually hear from Bree, if that makes sense for board members. Okay. So let me pull up my email.
Make sure you're on that microphone.
Make sure what?
Make sure you're on that. or
Do I
close-
need to
close
move
enough
it?
to it.
Okay.
Okay. Let me see.
So the one thing I'll say about it is that it is a sharing of spaces. So it is the forest for the school, but this MOU also allows for the installation of an accessible trail system. It just does not talk about the financing of the trail system, which we've agreed that that might be an addendum for later.
Okay, so thank you for that precision. Bree. So let me share my screen and then Bree will talk to us.
Can people hear her? too?
Can you hear me?
Can folks hear Bree? What are you seeing on my screen? Okay.
I think Rob shook,
Yeah.
said yes. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so you see my screen and not my tabs. Okay, let me make it bigger and then go ahead, Bree. Why don't you tell us what this is doing? So I guess reiterate a little bit what I said, or in your own words, sort of reiterate your understanding of what this MOU obligates the town to, and then talk a little bit about why you sought it. How about that?
Sure. So there are changes that are reflective of the new classroom spaces that are in the Milton Fry Nature area.
Page width.
What's wrong?
No, you're okay.
Go ahead, Bree, sorry.
Okay. So the biggest changes to this MOU from the previous year is that it is a 5-year MOU with an annual review by all parties to make sure that we are comparing apples to apples at all times, and that we all are still in agreement. But we're not doing all of this work over and over again. The SAU did have a request for an accessible trail to be put in, kind of an auxiliary trail to be put into the forest. So although we won't be speaking about the financing of that tonight, we will be talking in this MOU about allowing that trail to be built if this MOU is signed. So that would be able to go ahead. And we'll talk about financing later. But the other changes to this are that it more clearly outlines the responsibility of both the SAU and the Town of Norwich Recreation Department when we use their spaces. So it outlines which spaces we can use, what the custodial services are to be included, which was kind of a question this year, and what our responsibilities are when we're using that property. It also outlines the approximate dates for the requests that I make to the school district for use of their spaces. I personally really like that. It also gives the hours that the nature area will be used by the SAU. I did request, well, Roger requested that with this MOU, we look at a 5-year maintenance plan to go along with this MOU for the maintenance of the forest, to keep it as an educational outdoor resource for this school. I did request that the Upper Valley Trails Alliance provide that. We just don't have that yet. But the fact that this does say it's going to be reviewed every year to make sure that we're still in agreement, I think allows for flexibility to make sure that we're never, it's not a lopsided agreement at any time. So we would be comparing the custodial services, what the cost of those are. Right now, historically, we've been paying $13,500 to the SAU for use, or to the school district for the use of the building. So we would just make sure that that is the actual cost that is still being negotiated in this for the custodial services. And we would look to the UVTA to see what would be provided. That would be in kind.
Okay, and then just sorry to get too didactic, but so you're saying that this updated MOU, because there's currently an existing MOU that was signed with the school. So can you just talk a little bit about the history of these conversations? Like, what is the one that we currently have, and then why was it revised? Just so Marcia, I think, wasn't on the board. She wasn't on the board when that was done. So just to give her some of that little bit of background and to remind the rest of us.
Yeah, sure. So the existing MOU exchanges the same spaces, just not as detailed, for landscaping of the town green. That was agreed to with Larry Wiggins, with the understanding that he would have the staff to be able to carry that out. It's been a little strained. We didn't have that staff to carry out all of those services. And we also don't have a DPW head to sign an agreement right now or to agree that we can carry out those services. So in talking with Jamie Teague and Tom Candon and the rest of them, it seems like a natural fit is we're both using classroom spaces right now. And they've been asked to make a significant change to the forest, which is a student accommodation that I've been helping them to get the proposal for and the permissions for as much as I can. And it just seems like a better fit. They're both being used for, you know,
right,
the same group of people almost.
So just to sum up, if I can, just maybe it'll help me, and maybe it'll help others as I try to figure it out as well. So the current MOU and the past work was about an exchange of space for services, right? So the one that we have now was we were granted some access for classrooms in exchange for landscaping services, the mowing of the green, essentially. Due to some of the difficulties with like the labor and also the pandemic, it makes sense to revisit. And so what we're currently being presented with is that we will have access to the school spaces in exchange for access to one of our spaces, in this case, the nature area. And the trail this gives permission for them to build that trail as part of their educational goals.
Yes,
Okay.
I did forget to add one thing. There was a pandemic necessity added to the last MOU. There was an addendum, and they needed to have, there were a lot of parents in this town, I am one of them, very honestly, believe in kids being outdoors as much as possible, and the pandemic really drove some parents to want to see the school reopened with outdoor spaces. They approached the town. We talked to the SAU school district, and an addendum was added to implement the forest management plan in the Milton Fry Nature area. The SAU did pay for that forestry service, where they had the trees culled with the direction of the Conservation Commission and Lindsay Putnam, who was a LEAP coordinator over at the school. And then 10 families from Norwich came and helped me clear the trails with chainsaws and kids. It was great. So that was the addendum to the last MOU. So you will see that attached. What we're suggesting is to have a MOU that it really is, it's a great collaborative MOU, because we're sharing spaces, and I think it helps us work together better. But also it proposes that, this does not propose, but I am saying that we are going to be looking at another addendum, and we'll be working on that together with the select board input.
Okay,
Of course.
thanks. So I'm going to stop sharing on my screen and just ask, does everyone have the plot? Does everyone understand where we are right now? Yes.
Yeah.
That's great. I was really concerned. Go ahead, Marcia, you have any questions?
I got the plot, but I just have some questions about characters.
Yes, okay.
I think I didn't see the whole of this new MOU, but the other one that I read referred to the Norwich School District Facility Use Regulations, which I think were supposed to be attached but weren't, and I couldn't find them on the web. So I'm wondering, what are those? It sounds like we're not having to worry about additional fees. We don't say anything about refreshments, and I know kids usually want something. And also, I'm just wondering, the agreement doesn't specify that this is going to be year round. It's sort of implied, but I'm just wondering if that's the case and why that sort of specificity isn't in there. And then finally, I guess, to the extent that we'd be signing this and saying that we agree to create a trail, but we don't know how much the trail is going to cost, I'm wondering if we need to understand that before we sign it.
Yes. Yes, I've previewed Brie with some of your questions, Marcia. So thank you for asking them. Can you repeat your first one about what is referenced in this?
Yeah, I think the original one, but again, I couldn't see all of the second one. It referenced the Norwich School District facility use regulations, which I couldn't find.
Okay,
And so I wanted to, find out, is it true that there wouldn't be any more fees? It sounds like we're paying 13,500 for custodial. But what about refreshments? And also, is it clear that it's not clear from the memorandum, but is it clear enough for everybody else that this is going to be year round and not just summer?
yeah, Bree, do you have a perspective on what Marcia's asking?
Yeah, so you are correct. I don't have the Norwich School District facility use regulations either. So I will get those right over to you. I'm sure there are some Norwich School Board, Tom is on this call, so I'm sure he'll get those right over to us. And you are correct, it does not have the dates on here as far, it outlines our programming. So I imagine it goes by our calendar. It says their calendar on here, the school year calendar. And we can definitely add that. I do think that we've worked together long enough that we do know that we are year round. I am a year round department and they are a academic year facility, but yes, we can add that in there.
I never assume.
Yeah, I get it.
I want to get back to your last question, Marcia, about what are the implied obligations of this MOU budgetarily, particularly around the trail. But first, let's finish the chapter if we're keeping the plot metaphors. Mary, did you have any questions or clarifications or anything?
Yeah, I'm just interested in how trail accessibility will be defined. I would think the most drastic and probably not great for the forest would be hard pack, because you could run a wheelchair through there. I don't think that's what's intended, but I was sort of interested in whether the school is required to consider some of the ADA access standards. It says review by Conservation Commission and so forth, but not so much review by what might be required under that.
So to rephrase, to broaden it out, if I may, Mary. So Mary's asking, how is accessibility defined both in this MOU and to school standards, but then how does that intersect with any of the forestry management plans that conservation or any other entity oversees?
Yeah, so I actually went out on this trail with a parent of a mobility challenged child. And we also visited an ADA compliant trail in the area. We identified some areas that we had questions about, and then we brought out UBTA, who the Upper Valley Trails Alliance built the accessible trails at Bins. They're also known to be able to build ABA trails, not ADA trails. ADA trails would be paved. And that's not what we're looking at, but they're very good at measuring grades and keeping to the regulations, because just throwing hard pack in the woods is not making it compliant or accessible. There are guidelines, there are rules for this, and they know how to follow all of those. I went out there with them. They did check every single grade. They made switchback suggestions. They changed the ideas for the cribbing to make sure that there was never going to be an issue of erosion or, one little area just happens to have a dip that nobody's looking at or thinking about because they're not looking at those grades. We did talk to the Conservation Commission. They came out. I talked to UVLT, which is the easement holder of the forest. I also talked with Planning and Zoning, Ron Francis. They've all been in agreement with this proposal and the trail and the grades that we'd be looking at.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good, Claudette.
Sorry, I have a process question, and then I share the concerns that until we know the cost of this trail, I'm not, and the other answers to Marcia's questions, I personally am not willing to sign this tonight. And my process question is because this was not in the packet, It has not had the ability to be reviewed by us and by any other member of the public who may want to look at it and comment on it. So process-wise, I don't believe this can be up for a vote tonight.
So Claudette, I can tell you that the school board met last night, and so after their meeting is when I got the draft. So I do apologize for that. It wasn't going to make it in the packet. So.
Yeah, I
Yes.
understand that. So, but it's
know.
still a process problem.
I understand.
Right, and it arrived too late even for an addendum.
And it sounds like there are changes to be made to it too, which is, why we're here in second draft of this. And I can see some changes that are easy to make and some others that I have to
Good,
get
Claudette.
advice on. So.
Sorry.
I have just one other question. I believe in the last MOU, a use of the gazebo was included as
It was.
as a classroom space. Is
Yeah.
that going to be again, or is that excluded this time around?
So they did not ask for it.
Okay.
Okay, so I think it's appropriate to talk a little bit about Marcia's broader question, which I also wondered about when this sort of came, is obviously this, as the narrative that we have this evening is that this MOU grants permission for that trail to be built as part of the educational program, subject to review of the named entities and in line with some forestry management plans. But I do want to sort of ask about what the long-term budgetary implications, or at least what is the shared vision or the direction of this forest at this place. This is a town-owned asset, but it's very clear that it is the school's a valued stakeholder in using it.
Mhm.
So what can this board expect, even if it's not necessarily implied in this document budgetarily?
And that's what I need. I still don't have that maintenance plan. I'm really sorry about that, but that
Okay.
is the 5-year maintenance plan that I had asked for. So right now, what we're looking at is getting this one auxiliary trail put in. But other than that, I need the management. I need a plan from a licensed organization
Okay,
to maintain the trail.
okay. Any other board, if there's no other board member comments, I'll take some public comments and then we'll come back. How's that? Okay, Linda Cook, you were first.
Thank you. Thank you. The one question I had is, how is the forest and the classroom covered insurance-wise? By the town, by the school, and if you add an additional trail, where would that insurance come from?
Yeah, actually, thank you, Linda. I'm going to actually take your question over to Bree. Can you talk a little bit about liability, shared or otherwise for
Yep,
this?
so we'll have an MOU saying that they're responsible for anything that happens out in the forest, but we're also covered under the school's certificate of insurance for additionally named in that.
Okay, thanks.
Yep.
Tom Cannon, I believe you were next, and then Jenny Barba.
Thanks, Roger and board, for hearing this tonight. And I'll acknowledge I appreciate both Marcia and Claudette's concerns here. And this has been an arduous process to get to where we are, and some issues that arose in terms of what needs to be done to use the forest. This fall arrives over the summertime, and obviously, as Bree mentioned, did a lot of work to see what could be done to get the path to a usable means for the school district. It did come in extremely helpful last year when we moved outside in great numbers because of the pandemic, and I'm very hopeful that we can move ahead in doing that so this year as well. Again, I do appreciate what Claudette was saying. I'm sorry that some of this came in after the packet, as well as some of the changes, but I do hope that we can reference the MOU as you have it this evening. I do have a question for Bree too. I mean, we do have a proposal that was given to us with regard to just the work on creating the trail itself, if not the maintenance of the trail later on. We do have the rough numbers of what the costs have been in the past for the exchange with the classroom spaces. So we have that too. My concern here, and again, I hear what Claudette's saying, but if we delay this much further, that delays further our opportunity to get into the woods and to use them during the best season to use them at a time when it is critical given the current state of the pandemic. And I'm hopeful that we can move forward this evening in that regard. And if so, I'll immediately call together the school board after this and then work with Bree and the town to come to an agreement on an addendum that makes sense for all of us moving forward.
So Tom, just to be clear, as a follow-up, are you suggesting that if this governing body doesn't take action on this MOU, then you are suggesting that the educational program is going for Marion Cross is going to be compromised? Is that what you were suggesting to this group right now?
I'm suggesting it will delay our ability to get outdoors if we don't have an agreement that we can utilize that we can do the work on the trail system to be able to utilize them for the students. Yes.
Okay.
They will further delay that.
Okay, thank you. Marcia, I'm going to take Jenny Barba's comment and then I'll come back if that's okay.
Yeah, I was just going to question Tom about something.
We'll go ahead. Why don't you do that since Tom is pinned to our screen at this moment? What's your question?
I just wanted to know if it was possible first to have all of these addendums. Isn't it possible to have it in one memorandum of understanding? And can that include any insurance issues so that we know in one package what we've got? And then if this isn't able to be approved tonight, which it doesn't sound like it can be, and it's done in 2 weeks, are you telling us that that's too long?
I'm just saying that pushes us off another 2 weeks down the road, which would bump back the time frame on our ability to get into the woods. My understanding, based upon the proposal that we had received, is it will take about 4 weeks to do the construction work once it's been scheduled. So if we were to approve of this now and then be able to move forward with the project, and yeah, it adds 2 weeks, Marcia, to the 4 weeks that I understand the construction project will take once it's scheduled. But Bree will also have some information there too.
And Tom, when did these discussions first get taken up between the town and the school?
It's been an ongoing process over the course of the summertime. The construction project proposal that I see was August 10th.
Okay, our staff tells us that conversations began in May.
Okay, they began in May, Roger.
So the first proposal was June 10th.
Okay, June 10th. Okay, so summer, as Tom said.
So that was after.
And as we've noted, it's been an ongoing process to get through the committees and to understand what was necessary to approve of the trail system, as I'm sure you can appreciate the challenges with this type of a project.
Of course. Okay, thank you. I'll take the Jenny Barber's public comment then, please. If folks can state their name and locatable address, that would be great. That's something we do, and I should enforce it better.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jenny Barba, and my husband here is Christopher Coughlin. We live at 1037 Turnpike Road in Norwich. And I'm just going to read a letter that I sent in for everybody's benefit, and also share a couple of other points. I read the same letter last night at the Norwich School Board meeting. Dear SAU 70 Norwich School Board, Principal Gagne, Town of Norwich Select Board, and the Milton Fry Nature Area Committee. As parents of a rising second grader and an incoming kindergartner at Marion Cross School, it is critically essential for the children of the town of Norwich and all students and teachers of the Marion Cross School to have expansive and unlimited access to outdoor learning in the Milton Fry Nature Area. The incredible Marion Cross teachers worked above and beyond during the 2020-2021 school year to successfully include outdoor learning into their COVID-19 safety measures and educational curriculum during a global pandemic. Our 300 plus students, parents, and quite frankly, the entire town succeeded because our children were in school in person. Time outside in nature is essential to the safety of the entire community and also the mental health and well-being of every student. We don't know if you truly understand the immense gravity of restricting the use of the forest. Outdoor learning has an exponentially positive impact on the development of these children whose childhood has been dramatically impacted by massive fear of dying, or a friend or someone they love dying, or getting sick, anxiety being around people, and childhood development disruptions due to the global pandemic, including the inability to have play dates or spending time with relatives, multi-generational relationships, being in lockdown in their homes with fear of going outside, being told they can't hug anyone or that they are too close to a friend. And add on top of it an overload of Zoom and unnaturally forced use of technology, including early addictions to technology, gaming, and the internet more than ever before in human existence. Being in nature is one of the only normal things we have left for our children as a last hope for them to develop inner joy, self-esteem and confidence, meaningful relationships, love of learning, and respect for nature. We in Norwich have the ability to help our children and teachers thrive again this school year and for generations beyond. We urge you to act with urgency on the access and use of the Milton Fry Nature Area as a critical and essential component of the Marion Cross School as soon as possible. I have a couple notes in here about timing and policy and who's going to pay for it and clear next steps. And then the Marion Cross School teachers are outstanding. Actually, many of them are parents and working above and beyond. We want to support them in every way possible to be able to teach, guide, and feel safe. We truly believe the 2020-2021 school year at MCS was one of the best in the world. Let's make 2021-2022 even better and work together to make this happen. Our sons' favorite parts of the forest are building a campfire and playing in their own Roxaboxen, based on the book by Alice McLaren, which I strongly urge you to read. Our daughter is excited for her kindergarten year, filled with the imagination and creativity of Forest Fridays. Sincerely, Jenny Barba and Christopher Coughlin. And we just urge you that this is urgent. If the 300 plus children aren't able to access the forest for, a month or more of school, the safety of our community and the mental health is critical.
Yeah, we certainly respect your policy challenges, and we hope that to whatever extent possible, you expedite that if it requires calling a special meeting or whatever. But I certainly respect the policy matters that you're challenged with. So thank you for hearing our points of view.
And one other thing, thank you so much to Bree and her leadership and initiative in many aspects of outdoor learning. And then also, oh, my phone's ringing, sorry. It's probably my mom. And then also, thank you also for your time and all your leadership that you have been working hard for our town.
So thank you for your comment, Jenny and Christopher. Okay, so I want one other question for Bree, and then the board just needs to decide on what we would like to do this evening or a future meeting or what have you. So if we were to sign this, what would happen is, my understanding is that the access will be what I have heard be called phase 1. The phase 1 of this will be paid for by the financing of that will be done by the school. And,
so we're not tying ourselves to any financing in this agreement.
we're not tying ourselves to any financing in this
We are permitting
agreement.
them to put a trail in. It's a 400-foot trail from the driveway over to the gazebo and a figure 8 around the fire circle. So it brings them to the kindergarten area, and that's it. So 400 feet trail, but we are not agreeing to any financing here yet. It's literally just permission to put the trail in this MOU, because we're not discussing the addendum yet.
But if, okay. Claudia, do you have a question?
Yeah.
Yes, that MOU is obligating us to put in a trail at a cost that we as a board do not know what that cost will be.
So it's not though, Claudette, it's not obligating you to put in the trail. It's
It's-
only giving
it's-
access for a trail to be installed, but not by the town of Norwich.
We need to see the language.
Can you put it up again?
I'll put it up and then it's 8:15, we're over, so then we'll all just, we'll go
So
from
it
there.
says the town additionally agrees to the installation of an accessible trail system within the town forest, which needs to be changed to the nature area. This trail shall be approved and reviewed by the town, the Upper Valley Land Trust, and the Conservation Commission.
I mean, it could be implied, it just says agrees to the installation of, paid for by whom or financed by whom, right?
And so that can obviously be changed. We're trying to add that in there.
And I
to
think for
help.
members, and I'm sorry to interrupt folks, but I think just for members of the public, you know, if we're being asked to finance a trail system for our asset, at the very least, this board should be expecting a sense of those costs.
Yes.
That's all. Okay.
Which we don't have yet,
which
which
we don't
is why it's not in there.
Okay. And which is why Bree is saying that, is suggesting language to make it clear that signing of that doesn't obligate us to that at this time. I think the sticky wicket is that we can expect an addendum where we may very well have these conversations, right?
Yes.
Okay. Any further conversation or comments, Marcia?
I really feel like, you know, this obviously is a priority. And
Mhm.
as a parent, I can imagine how I would feel. I'm very glad my kids are in their 20s and 30s because I understand how this must be. But I also understand our obligation to the town. And so I'm happy to have a special meeting tomorrow, the next day, whenever. I'm happy to expedite this, but I think we need to have more on black and white, and we need to have some numbers. And all of the stuff about, you know, the addendums on addendums, I don't think are healthy. We need to have everything in one place and understand what we're doing. And then I'm willing to meet whenever we need to, but let's get it down on paper.
Okay, and Marcia, Bree is not necessarily totally shocked by this because I had asked similar questions and had prepared her for this possibility. Okay, any other board members have any comments or agree with Marcia's process suggestion? Go ahead, Mary. You're on mute, Mary. Sorry.
Sorry, I agree with everything that Marcia said. I'm also very willing to meet if it can pull this MOU together and clean it up and get some financial information into it. I'd feel much more comfortable moving forward. And I think it's going to be terrific for the kids when we get this done.
Claudette?
I agree with Marcia as well, and I'm more than happy to have a special meeting when this information is obtained.
Rob? Any
I
thoughts?
agree.
Okay.
Pretty straightforward, yeah.
All right, Tom Cannon, I see your hand up, and then we'll move on because it seems like we have a clear consensus from this board.
Okay, well, I'll just note and Bree can correct me if I'm wrong, but I had in front of me, and I know it's not a 5-year plan, but we had the plan for the actual building of the trail. Those numbers we do have right now. If we do not get this 5-year plan before we can schedule a special meeting, and I'm happy to do that within the limited time frame we have, which is I'll do first thing tomorrow morning, try to get my board together for 24 hours later, ideally by noon on Friday. What else needs to be done? Because I can do that. And Bree, just correct me if I'm, what more are you looking for beyond what was in that original proposal of August 10th? So that I know and can help out with that.
Well, so we have to, do you mean the proposal from UVTA?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's their proposal. It just has to, that would have to go through permitting, through zoning and planning. But I mean, we also have to fix the MOU. There are quite a few questions tonight that I have to work on. Staff.
Okay, so then for the rest of the board, Roger, can we agree to try to settle this or schedule a special meeting on Friday so that we have our 24 hours notice?
Well, I just want to, this is, Bree just sort of dropped new information on us a little bit, like, well, if this board needs to get a sense of real numbers in order to approve this, and if these real numbers are not real until it goes through a permitting process, then it doesn't necessarily matter what time we set on Friday. Is that what I'm hearing?
Oh, no, I meant for it to be built. So Rod has to go out with the new proposal from UVTA. And then it probably has to go to DVA. I haven't done that with
Okay.
him yet. He's looked at the last one, not this one. So.
Is this proposal from UVTA something that is subject for discussion by our boards? Yes or no? Are these the numbers that we're seeking, or are there other numbers that we?
I think these are the numbers that you're seeking. The last proposal is for 28,000. That's
Okay.
Yeah. That's not for the full trail system. That's what I was trying to explain to you, is that is for this first part of the trail. So that is the trail that they're looking to build.
And I just want to get clarity from board members. Do you want to have do board members want a sense of any future obligations of this trail system or not? Okay, board members are saying yes. So,
It's your financial obligations is what you're saying.
so are we
Roger?
fine? Yeah, so
Okay.
yes.
Because we have been trying to think about assets and their lifespan and their maintenance to be more responsible in talking of, I mean, it's really a capital resource. So we've been trying to be more responsible with that and thinking ahead.
And Roger did ask for that in our MOU meeting, and I have that request in.
So I guess what Tom is asking before he convenes his body, do we have the ability to get this information in? Do we have the ability to get this information quickly?
Yeah.
It's okay if we don't,
Maybe
or
not.
if it's not possible, then sounds like this is TBD at the end of the day.
Yes, I did put in another call today. I don't have the 5-year plan.
Can
Go
I
ahead,
ask
Tom.
one more question? So Bree, is it the proposal of August 10th that Rod needs to review to be able to approve to then move forward? And that's question number one. Question number two is, I understand that there is a desire, the school would like it too, to have a 5-year plan to understand the cost here as well. But we've written into this MOU the clause that we can do an annual review on this and rethink it at the end of each year. So I like that clause is in there. It gives us the ability to rethink it. We can move faster on this if we are further delayed from anything from the people that Bree is waiting on.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, but what Roger is asking is that we're planning ahead for the full 5 years.
Yeah.
And that's what I had asked from UVTA. I do get what you're saying, and that's why we have that proposal for that specific trail. And but I don't have the numbers that Roger was asking for yet, unfortunately, and I can't even estimate that.
I understand that, but what the question I'm asking for is the actual building of the trail. What did you say needs to be done there? Rod needs to go out and approve it? Who needs to do the next step there?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so Rod hasn't had the chance to do that with this version.
Not with this version. We've changed it and we don't have the full trail yet.
So just to summarize, because we're now getting, I think the chickens are roosting. So in other words, so what we will hear is that assuming we are able to approve this MOU with any diligence that this board determines is necessary, which just sounds like a sense of like future budgeting and maintenance costs. Assuming we have that and sign this MOU, then the school board will have permission, or the school will have permission to proceed on the construction of this trail, which is subject to review by zoning. And so, is that right?
Yes.
So then my question then to our colleagues from the school board is, if our board, cooperates and gets all the information they need in order to feel comfortable with the decision, would you, with the zoning process, and which I don't know how long that would take, would there still be enough time? Is it worth it? Is this just a matter of Rod sort of clearing his schedule and going out and making approvals, or is there like a longer approval process? I'm asking Herb, I'm
Yeah, I
asking
don't
Bree.
know that part.
What is going on?
Yeah, and I don't know the zoning well enough to know if it's a permitted use, which Rod can just sign off on
Oh,
by
look, Rod's
himself,
here.
or if it's, is he
Yeah,
here?
and when I
Okay.
talked to UVTA, they seem to think it was a material, the amount of material you're putting in the forest or that you're moving.
Because and I'm asking these questions because we've had parents here this evening who sort of want to know sort of the outcome of their curriculum this fall. And I just want to clarify what our responsibilities are and what we are and are not able to do in collaboration or cooperation. So Rod, do you have any insights to offer for us?
Yes, it's an aspect of the regulations that's not particularly clear. So as you might imagine, nature trails or trails in general are not described specifically in the zoning regulations as a use or as a type of structure, but the definition of development and the definition of structure are broad enough that the installation, particularly of a paved trail, constitutes a form of development. I've not seen any drawings or site plan, and I've not had any conversations with UVTA about the extent of their proposal. So I'm hoping and assuming that on the basis of my quick read of the zoning regulations, that it would be able to be permitted as a so-called accessory structure. And that's something that the zoning administrator can issue. So that doesn't require a hearing at the DOB, but it will require the other aspects of a normal zoning permit application, which would be the display of a zoning permit notice sign and the 15 days thereafter for abutters to review the permit application and, if necessary, appeal the zoning administrator's decision.
Okay, so thank you, Rod. So we're hearing, if the board gets all the information they need to be able to execute this MOU, then it would depend. And if Rod is expedient in issuing that permit, you have a 15-day minimum. Does that help answer your question?
So for the sake of discussion, if the UVTA submitted drawings tomorrow or Friday, then yeah, give me a week to review it and then issue the permit, and then 2 weeks, allow 2 weeks for the appeal period to expire before construction commenced.
Okay, does that help address some matters, Tom?
Unfortunately, yeah, I had.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't know what matters it resolves. It resolves that it's going to take longer than had been discussed earlier. So.
Okay, Marcia, do you have any questions, or are you perhaps suggesting a way forward for this agenda item?
Oh, maybe both. I'm just thinking, is a trail necessary for use of the outdoor space? Or is that just necessary so that everybody has access? And I thought I knew what was happening here in terms of we were supposed to be paying for something, but now I'm not sure who's supposed to be paying for something.
Yes, so I think we were asking long-term maintenance commitments related to this, and but it seems like the initial trail of which is quoted at $28,000, the financing of that is borne by the school in order to meet their educational requirements.
But it's not explicitly stated that way.
Yes, the only thing that this MOU states is that, and then not clearly, is that they have permission to build it. But what we are learning in this conversation, or what's really clear, is even with the MOU giving permission, that doesn't make the school not subject to a zoning process, a permitting process, right?
So my question still is there any way for the school to use this land without a trail for the moment, if this is going to take us longer to work out. No.
I'm seeing some no's, but thank you for the question, Marcia. It's important. Claudette, go ahead.
Can we not just extend the current MOU for another 90 days or 60 days?
I think the school requires permission to build the trail in order to meet their compliance.
Right, but to allow them to use the forest until we get all of these other stuff
But
done.
they can't use the forest without a compliant trail. It has to be an accessible trail.
That would not help them.
It has to serve all students.
Okay, got it.
So I think given, I think this was certainly instructive. I guess what I would recommend is whether or not the school board and SAU 70 in after this meeting wants to continue in this conversation, then I would then ask that we learn more about the long-term maintenance, and then we can proceed. But I think given sort of the time frame and what is required of UVTA in order to pass the regulatory landscape, I defer to the school as to whether or not they wish to pursue this for the fall, right? That's my reading of the situation.
Well, they could get the late fall and then they'll have winter if they could pull it off. But there's just a lot to be done with the zoning, the MOU.
But I think with the argument that Bree went into, and then I'll wrap it up, is that you know, it doesn't make any sense. So the MOU gives permission to build it, and there's requirements that we have in order for the school to have that permission. So the MOU is not enough, is what I've learned from this conversation. Anyone else hear something differently, or should we
I think
move
we
on?
should just revisit the topic when it's more organized.
Go ahead, Marcia.
So separating the MOU from the zoning, is it possible to clean up this MOU sooner rather than later while the zoning is taking its process time?
We're hearing yes. That's Bree has said yes. So we can certainly clean it up and then make inquiries to UVTA.
So maybe we could expedite that and have a meeting.
Okay. I think that's a great way forward. Rob, do you have any other thoughts, and then we'll move on?
Yeah, it seems as if this is our question is the financial responsibility that we would be taking on. The concept of allowing the school to do this and letting that trail be created, I think pretty much everybody appreciates that and would like to move forward. And if there was a way to get the UVTA plan before our zoning administrator, and while we sort out the financial, it might speed the process up.
Okay. That's where we are. So we'll wait for their direction, and we can move on from this agenda item. Okay. All right. So the next item on the agenda, don't go anywhere, Bree, is the proposed gifts to the town via the Recreation Department.
Okay.
Board will be asked to accept gifts. There was background materials in the form of emails on this playground equipment in the packet. I'm sorry, I'm seeing one other public comment. Jenny Barber, I'll take your public comment. And then
It's Christopher Coughlin. I actually do land use permitting for a living, so I have a policy question here, probably for Tom, the planner. I believe that the fee owner of the property will need to sign the zoning application. So if the applicant, so the applicant would actually end up being the fee owner of that property. If that's the town, I guess the town would have, somebody would have to sign that application in order for it to advance. And I believe you may need a resolution as the town board, or I'm sorry, to sign that application. So if that's a policy matter that needs to be resolved, we either need to call a special meeting for that to expedite that portion of it.
Yes, I think we learned that it doesn't require the zoning administrator can act on that. I think the problem is we have gotten that person has gotten none of the materials to do so at this time.
Tom, isn't it? Don't you need a signature on the application by the fee owner of the property? Yes, so I was correct on that. So that's the point. And if that's the town, then the town may need to actually adopt a resolution to sign that application as a policy matter. So that should be taken under consideration in terms of time. So a special meeting may need to be called just to simply sign that application. But of course, UVA, the Trails Alliance can start to do that application and do an application intake meeting with Tom to make sure everything's there pending the signature of the town.
Rod, do you want to tell us more about the permitting application process as our land use administrator?
Yes, certainly. Christopher is correct. So in the instance when the applicant is not the owner of the real property, and I believe if the school is going to be the applicant, the town is the owner of the property, then the applicant can make an application as long as the owner of the property signs off. I don't know what the custom in Norwich is with regard to that. It doesn't necessarily, in my mind, that does not necessitate a motion from the select board. You could delegate the authority to sign the application to the town manager or somebody else. But you know, Christopher raises a good point that separate from the financial question and separate from the review of the permit, the town would need to arrive at a decision that effectively you agree with the concept of the school attempting to construct a trail. And so I don't see it as a complicated policy question, but if you were being attentive, you probably want to spend time indicating to whoever is going to be in the town manager role that they have the authority to sign the permit application.
And Herb is whispering to me, because he's sitting next to me, that authority typically lies with his office.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that?
That the authority lies with his office, the town manager's office.
That's my understanding.
So, yes. Marcia, do you have a point, or because we had already moved on and then we went back to take the public comment and now we're having a regulatory conversation, but do you have a comment on the former agenda item?
Yeah. Chris, does that satisfy what you understand? And could you you probably know the law off the top of your head, so it'd be nice if you just cited that. And Rod, you may be confusing people because you're listed as Town of Norwich, and it'd probably be better if you had your name.
Okay.
Yeah.
Chris?
Go ahead, Christopher, if you, Marcia has asked for your insight, so go ahead.
Well, I can't opine on the regulation of the town. It's just the policy matter. I do these all across the country where we most often see if the applicant is not the fee owner, that the fee owner must sign the application. But it's been clarified here that the town manager has already been granted that authority through the select board. So they're authorized as an executive or whatever their role title is to sign such applications on behalf of the town. So that won't require another special meeting just for a signature on that application. That's what I was trying to preempt for everybody here, so that we wouldn't have to wait, 2 weeks or something like that just to simply get a signature. Because as was described by the planner, there's a review period and then the appeal period once the permit has been approved. So that's looking at about like 3 weeks from the time the package is deemed complete.
And obviously seems like there's pressure back on UVTA to respond as expediently as everyone here seems to want them to. So yes.
So
Um,
given the way this is going, isn't it reasonable that we just make a resolution or something that we authorize that?
I don't think we need to authorize it if we all agree that the town manager has that authority. If you would, I'm happy to take the resolution if we don't agree with that. And I think, Marcia, you were asking for the citation. And it sounds like you want, yeah. So I'm comfortable with the nods of the people in the room on that, that it's, yeah. And so I'm seeing Claudette nod and Mary nod and Rob nod. So I think we're comfortable with saying that the power lies with the town manager's office. And yes, and the office, yeah, okay. But thank you, I heard you ask for the citation. Let's go back to the agenda item 8, the proposed gifts to the town via the rec department. So the only, I mentioned what this was and what materials were available. The only other thing I'll say is we may wish to consider this gift under the current gift policy, which just the way that I see that it's applied is that if this is not consistent with budgeted items, then it requires approval of the board, and that approval the board, and we may wish to consider some of the hallmarks, the to be finalized gift policy that provides a little bit of a review process on that. So that's all I got. Would people want to hear a little bit from Bree, or do they want to get straight into questions about what is being proposed?
There are 2 gifts too, right?
Should we hear from Bree, or do people have questions for Bree? How do we want to handle it?
Why don't we just have a motion and then discuss it?
I'll take a motion.
Okay. I move to accept the gift of playground equipment proffered by Vermont After School and the gift of $500 to the John Gerard Fund proffered by Kathy Gerard.
Is there a second?
Second.
I think Marcia got that one. Okay, any discussion?
I think this would be a good upgrade to Barrett. It's going in Barrett Meadow. Just
It's
be
going
more
in Barrett
fun. Yep, more fun for the kids. And I just think we should just do this and not analyze it to death.
Go ahead, Marcia.
I agree. I think that probably, excuse me, under the existing gift policy, this would be okay as long as we're approving it. And under the new policy, I think we're kind of heading in that direction. So that just we're going to be approving things, right?
Mhm.
And so I think I'm happy with it.
Okay, and the only, I think we talked about sort of consistency across departments. I think it's really important. And so we recently took up the topic of a $35,000 grant for body cameras for the police department. This is different because it was not necessarily actively solicited, is what Bree tells me. It was offered, and also the difference is this conversation, we're being asked to approve it. Should I call the question or any further discussion? Go ahead, Claudette.
Just one question. Ongoing maintenance of this playground equipment. I don't imagine it's going to be cost prohibitive and would be included in Bree's operational budget. I just want to be clear if it is.
Yes.
Bree saying yes.
Yes, I met with the owner of Natural Playgrounds in Concord, New Hampshire. Well, Zoom met with him, as we do now. And we did take several items out of play just because of that, like climbing walls and other options that would have a lot more upkeep. And that's why we went with an embankment slide and a Gaga pit. They're very low maintenance. They include all structural bases, really easy to install and very low on the upkeep.
And my ignorance is showing here, what is a Gaga pit?
Oh, so if you go over to the school, it's this large pit with plywood. It can be like, I think 12 feet or 16 across, and the kids just smack a ball back and forth and they love it. So our camps this year, the camp that I ran, the Outdoor Adventure Kids, they would play out in that Gaga pit for 45 minutes before we started any program every morning. I mean, first time I saw it, I was like, what is that? But the kids love it. And it's just slapping a ball against the boards and jumping to get out of the way of the ball. Really
Okay.
simple.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So
Go ahead, Marsha.
quick question. Installation costs for the slide or anything?
No, so I made sure, I told him what we have for a DPW department and community help, and he said that this was our best bet.
The only questions I had, which given the enthusiasm from all of you, I hesitate to even raise it. Obviously this land is deeded as a playground, and so playground equipment makes sense to add there. And I think that is the logic that we're going with in terms of any special consideration of what can and cannot be placed on this deeded land. And so as I asked Bree in advance, and she said it is deeded as a playground, and I hope the board shares in the long-term vision of that. So that seems sufficient.
You also asked about abutters, and I will say there isn't a butter on this call right now. And I did propose a volleyball pit a while back when I first started for Barrett, and the abutters said no. And I completely understand why, because they didn't want it to turn into an adult playground and maybe an attractive nuisance. And so I think that the youth playground equipment would be more acceptable in a residential area like that with limited parking.
That's great. And the only, in terms of further obligations, pizza oven and playground equipment beg for further considerations down the road of parking and dogs. So we'll get there, because I talked about it at this meeting. So we know that we'll have to deal with parking and dogs should that actually happen. Go ahead, Marsha, you had a point.
So that was my question about the oven, bread oven. And how far away is it going to be, and is it going to be a problem?
No, so they won't even be, so the bread oven is right next to the road, and I'm envisioning the Gaga pit being further over, kind of towards the brook in a flat area over there, and the embankment slide has to be on an embankment, and it will not be close to the bread oven. It'll be further over where there's a little bit more of a hill.
Okay, so any further discussion, or can we call the question? Okay.
Call the question.
Okay, all in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, great. Let us take a 5-minute break. It is 8:48. We are, well, no, we had another agenda item. So let's go to the financial reports and financial dashboard updates. Herb, the action suggests that we'll be presented an updated financial dashboard. You explained in your town manager report why that's not there. Is there anything you want us to know about the pre-audit and the year-end financial reports and balance sheets at this time?
I think just the main thing I already mentioned earlier in my town manager report of the undesignated fund balance as well. Let me get there. The undesignated fund balance of $860,714.68, and that the fund balance for that current year was $336,530.34. Again, with bottom line, which shows that we did well for the fiscal year that we're closing out in a pre-audited situation. In going through some of the various component pieces, again, COVID weighed in fairly heavily to what's going on. Also with regard to a number of the staff changes or having vacancies in staffing in certain areas also helped to contribute to, I will say positively, to whether that means not spending money, such as for the laborer position that was in public works that we stole some of that money to pay for some other things, but essentially not having that person on staff, there's a net savings there, both for benefits and salary wise. On the other side of the coin, like with recreation, we weren't able to provide a number of the programs that we typically offer, so there was a savings there. But on the other side of the coin, we didn't realize some of the typical revenues that we get with regard to registration fees to offset those programs. And so again, the COVID had a definite impact with regard to how we went through the particular year. If there are specifics, if you want me to go through any level of specificity of that, I'm more than happy to do that. But I think the key here at this point is the bottom line keeps us still flush. The point that I will make, one of my last points that I'll make, is that because you do have this undesignated fund balance that is in excess of your current policy, there is a portion of that undesignated fund balance that you'll want to shift, ask voters how you want to expend that particular money as you move forward, potentially with your new policy related to the fund balance, and create that new sort of reserve fund. That the only thing I would suggest that you do is, as you currently have your policy drafted, you're looking at kind of a commingled fund balance reserve. I don't mind that you do that, but I would suggest that you actually have two funds, one that's specific to your emergency reserve. That's that amount of money that you need, that's effectively related to your current policy of that 12 to 16% of operations. And then any remaining sum you have in sort of that commingled account that the board might decide what they deal with, either through voter approval or through board authorization. But I would recommend that you not commingle it. I'm not saying it's wrong. I just think it's better to keep that funding separate and apart from other stuff. And that way you can better understand if you want to keep that sort of percentage look of 12 to 16%, you can figure that out. Whereas if you have other things that are technically commingled in that with a general fund balance, you may not be able to as readily decide whether you have those funds or not. So it allows you to regulate and either add funds to it or what have you for the emergency reserve, and then the fund balance can stay the way it is based on anything that you wish to shift in there with any undesignated fund balance that you have, or what will turn into the question of surplus or deficit.
Okay. Do any board members have questions about Herb's sort of Herb's recommendation about undesignated fund balances? I think he's made this points to us elsewhere. Or so if any questions on the recommendation that we're hearing, or any questions on the sort of the reports that we've gotten. Okay. And obviously in the pandemic year, it's significant that we were able to stay on budget, no deficit. So I think, thank you, right?
I think it's the department heads that play into that significantly, obviously the board, but that's what we strive to do as town managers, is to do these kinds of things. So as much as we did have a pandemic and some other things, some things were given to us sort of by free, like some of the transportation money, but you know, town managers take credit for those things, right? So
yes, and you should take credit for keeping us on budget, Herb, for sure. Okay, so we'll move on from this agenda item if you folks don't have any questions. Okay, we're good to move on to our break.
Could
Mary,
it be
did you have a
10 and
comment?
not 5, please?
Would you like, you can have 10. We're over, but we deserve.
Okay.
10.
Thank you.
Okay, so oh god, it's 54. So How?
Wait till 55.
So 10 minutes from 8:54. Thanks. I'm resuming the select board meeting of August 25th at 9:05. Okay. The table just fell for those not live in the audience. Okay. The next item on the agenda is an update on the interim town manager process. This was sort of this was one, we want to discuss the interim town manager process, and then we wanted sort of two to discuss the results of my inquiring regarding the recruitment, possible recruitment services. I think I'm going to just talk about that part so I can get the bulk of my talking out of the way and then so I can start listening. Okay, so at our last meeting, I was authorized by the board to make inquiries to VLCT at the regarding an interim town manager. At the time, we had thought that deeper recruitment services were going to be needed to identify an intern. In my conversations, I got clarification that their recruitment services are for longer term candidates, long-term candidates, and that the extent of their interim work was to provide names through their networks and then have member towns do their own process for contracting with those names that they put forward, right? But in that conversation, I did get information on long-term recruitment services. It didn't arrive for the packet deadline, but I have shared that with board members, and the VLCT is able to give a presentation to discuss their recruitment services at a meeting in September. And so that's one of the questions I will have for all of you. The other piece that I wasn't specifically authorized for, but I did some extra credit, is I reached out to Municipal Resources, Inc. That the town of Hartford engaged with, and also Herb had suggested. The recruitment services they offer are in the packet. And so that is the update. I've shared all this info. I've shared this during our agenda setting over email, but that is the update for the public. So can we just, any questions or any comments that anyone have regarding these two sort of recruitment services that have been brought forward?
Yeah, it's good information, both on the long term and the short term. They're slightly different styles, actually quite different. I believe we used the VLCT method last time when we were looking for a long term. It was very logical and, I think very helpful.
Okay, go ahead, Marcia.
So it wasn't clear to me if the MR Inc. was necessarily just long-term or interim, and VLTC, I gather, is both.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, and this is why this agenda item is all sort of blurring together. So normally MRI, not normally, or what has happened in the case of Hartford and Enfield, is they have one of their staffers serve an interim role and to have interim town manager services, but then also to assist with the long-term search as well. In this case, I took an informational call with one of their staffers. They were not able to commit to the work because of the distance, and MRI has no other suggestions for us for an intern. So their long-term recruitment services are available to us, but one of the normal practices would be they would have an intern for us while that search was being undertaken. The other thing I'll say about the material in the packet is there's sort of two options for recruitment services, and sort of the smaller package that you might characterize as the time and materials package was suggested by the head of the org as perhaps the best way forward for Norwich. But yes, Marcia, the interim that is offered through this normally offered is not available for MRI. For VLCT, they too don't offer an interim as you engage with their recruitment services, but they just as a courtesy know of folks, right? And put names together, and any labor agreement that you have is between you and that candidate. So yes, does that help?
Have you discussed with them an interim?
So there is a possible candidate that was put forward, and that candidate is available to speak with the full board at a future meeting if the board wishes. And I had forwarded materials. I forwarded materials to this board on that candidate that VLCT has offered or said was available, right? They don't vet, and indeed this person doesn't work for the league. Does that make sense?
Yeah, except it wasn't clear to me. I was kind of thinking you were sending examples that they had sent, but that's a real
candidate.
Okay.
Okay, Mary, do you have a question?
No, I have a suggestion that we invite the candidate that kind of popped up and have a conversation with that person at a future meeting soon.
Okay. Do
I'd
others?
like to hear what others think too about that idea.
Go ahead, Claudia.
I think Rob was ahead of me.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rob, I didn't see your hand.
I agree that that would be a good idea. I would also like to move on one or both of those services. The only thing I would worry about with taking on two would be whether or not they're drawing from the same pool.
I think
Two services, yeah.
So they're comparably priced. There are cost estimates in both of them, and I would love actually if I could get some sense of which one is preferred, while recognizing that VLCT has stated that they would be happy to present and answer questions, and I'm sure MRI would accept an invitation if we extended it as well. But Mary mentioned there were different merits to them, differences, and if anyone has any analysis or direction, that would be good to gather some of that intel if we're comfortable doing that right now. Go ahead, Mary.
We worked with VLCT process last time that we were searching for a permanent town manager, and it's very step-by-step. I think it's kind of intuitive for the like a town committee that would help to vet out the resumes and so forth. So I think for our town it worked really well last time. I think I almost see the MRI as being a little bit more corporate, and it would be perhaps a little bit more of us making the evaluations and making the judgments about kind of personality fits and so forth. So I would recommend that for the long-term process, we go back to the VLCT. It's very logical. It has the timetable. They help you develop the job description, interview questions. Involving a town committee was very helpful last time. It builds confidence, and then the people on the committee often have very good questions. So I would recommend that route for the long term.
Do any other board members have thoughts on the materials brought forward, while recognizing that VLCT's work didn't make the packet? Go ahead, Claudette.
two things. For the interim, I would like to see if we can't schedule something for our first meeting in September.
Okay.
And then just reviewing the two separate companies, I thought VLCT provided a much more personal level of support. Working with the board, what they could offer in between times, I was, you know, there, as well as assisting with the what questions to avoid during an interview process to
That's very
not get yourself into trouble with inappropriate questioning. So those would be my recommendations, but also in the interim, and I think we agreed at the last meeting to endorse Rod as kind of like, I don't know whether we would call him the acting or the interim until we get a more permanent interim.
maybe first interim or something. We have second interim.
So I just want us to clarify that, and viewing Marcia's memo to the board, I don't think those questions are, you know, I think having an existing employee filling in until we get a formal interim is the process we've used in the past. And, you know, I just think it's the appropriate move to make.
Okay, thank you, Claudette. Mary?
I just want to point out that it was exactly the process we used the last time that we had to search for a permanent town manager and an interim. Well, actually the interim. We did have, actually it was a planning director of at the time, who I think he had more experience. He may have been on the select board in Pomfret, so he did have some more experience, but sometimes you just have to tap the person that you think is best suited to the job. I almost see it as an emergency situation. So, and if we can come up with a person with more direct experience, that of course is much better. So some of this will be sort of luck, I think, an opportunity.
Yeah, the only thing I'll say to that, and then Marcia, I'll take your comment, is I'm thankful that currently our most senior staff member has a willingness to serve in an interim role. The statute makes no distinction between acting or interim. We have and my understanding is we affirmed the choice, and so following August 30th, unless we take new action, Rod is fulfilling these duties with the board's thanks, I would hope, right? So that's what I'll offer on that point. We're really muddling this agenda item, but that's okay. Go ahead, Marcia. Do you have your hand up?
So yes, I did. So you're right, I believe. The statute is clear, it's manager. It doesn't say what type of manager. And I think what we have to do, and we have to think, you know, today in the paper, there was the Peterborough $2.5 million scam. We have had, you know, a fraction of that, but it could happen again. And I think that what we need to do is cross all the T's and dot the I's, which to my mind means we do what the statute says. And even if we feel it's perfunctory, we review any interim, including Rod, for training, education, experience, and the VLTC information indicates statute requires we do a credit check. I would not want to be in a position where we are targeted and the, you know, insurance looks at us and says, so did you follow all the rules? What have you, who's in charge? And they're looking at that. I want to have crossed the T's. So it's a simple enough thing. And I think we're doing ourselves a favor to follow the law. and I don't know why we wouldn't. And second of all, I agree with Mary and Claudette. I think that the VLTC information looked terrific, and I would definitely think going with them is good. The only thing that I found of concern was that they didn't mention anything about writings. And in every search that I've participated in, those are strictly controlled. So not only is it necessary to know what we're asking for questions, but the kinds of things that we're writing down during an interview are important. And so I'd like to know how they would handle that. But other than that, I would recommend going with the VLTC and bringing the person that was indicated in for next meeting, or even a special meeting earlier.
Okay. I see your hand, Mary. I'm gonna, go ahead, Mary.
That's okay, you can.
Well, I was just going to ask Rob, because I just
Sure.
What I'd love to know is how what Hartford's experience with MRI was and Enfield. But I have no objection to VLCT. I think they have the greatest consideration for towns that are members of the organization and would be entirely adequate for a search.
Yeah, I will report, Rob, that at least anecdotally in correspondence, Dan Fraser indicated that they were excellent. And, you know, some of the questions I wonder is if they, as a proper recruitment firm, rather than sort of a consultant or an arm of a wider organization, if they are indeed set up in larger networks to do that kind of search. And I think giving the dearth of people with less strict town management or municipal government background, you might want to sort of cast a wider net for perhaps unconventional candidates, whether it be an auditor as they have in Hartford, or someone with another broader background. I'm also philosophically keen on doing something that you haven't done before, because quite frankly, whatever you've done before hasn't worked out. So I'll say that. Go ahead, Marcia.
Just in terms of trying to compare things, I took the highest estimated cost of the one firm and divided it out by the hourly cost of the VLTC. And it would be about 183 hours of time. So I'm wondering if, which comes out to like 22 8-hour days. So Mary or Claudette, who were participating in those other reviews, do you think it was that much time?
I wasn't a participant in the earlier reviews.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you, Marcia, but that's a very good way to think about it, I think. I have a related question about time and money. Is it okay, Roger?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah. One thing is that, and I think Herb pointed this out, that it might be fair for Rod, as he is our first interim or acting or whatever we'd like his title to be, to adjust his salary upward, perhaps to put it midway between what Herb earns and his own. So I'm just throwing that out as a suggestion. And also, if we do have a conversation with a candidate for interim that we think that it's worked out, and we've done I think it's still really important to do criminal background check and all of that, that we also need a salary idea for that person. We need to kind of decide what that's going to be. So there's just decisions to be made.
So Mary, just to clarify, you're asking about the long-term salary of the sort of the permanent position?
No, I'm asking about the, first of all, an adjustment to the salary of Rod Francis, first of all. And
Yeah.
second of all, for an interim, we do have to have some figure in mind to pay the interim.
Well, we have an existing budget line we would use. I assume we would draw from the existing budgeting line for the town manager. Right? For that.
Okay, well, all I'm saying is that that's a decision or two decisions.
Okay. Marcia, did you have your hand up?
Yes, please. As to the proposed salary, again, any place I've ever been, qualifications determine it. And I think we need to see a CV, and we need to check those qualifications and do the credit check, and then we can decide on the money. And I also think we need to have a letter of understanding or something, because we're talking about a person straddling two positions. So I don't think, my mantra is never assume. I want to know what somebody's going to be doing and what their expectations are and what ours are.
Okay. Does anyone share any, do any board members agree with Marcia on her points? Go ahead, Mary.
I kind of do. I mean, I understand that Marcia's really good about doing the due diligence and so forth. I'm sure that Rod would personally just like to be the planning director and not have this challenge foisted on him. I do see it as a placeholder. I would think that Rod will do his best that he can to help us maintain some continuity until we have an interim with general management experience. And I think it's almost like, let's say, combat pay, but just incentive pay, or, there's going to be a learning curve. There's going to be probably a few things might not get done that ordinarily would with an experienced manager. But I think it's fair to raise that salary a bit. And then there's just an appropriate salary for the interim, and it might not be right up where Herb is at the moment, or it might be. And I don't need to see a CV. I mean, I think Rod was thoroughly vetted when he came on here. We know he's a planner, and we know he's organized. We know he's articulate. He's willing to do the job. So I don't feel that need or the need for a credit check.
Okay, thank you, Mary. Claudia, I saw your hand, and then I'll come back to you, Marcia.
Yeah, I agree with Mary on those last parts. I'm sure that there was a credit check when Rod assumed his position as planner. I don't think we need to do it again. I don't need to look at his CV. I do wonder, and I would like Rod's opinion on this, if he feels some kind of memorandum of understanding outlining what his responsibilities would be helpful for him.
Good point.
And I do agree with a bump in salary while he's assuming both positions.
Rod, do you feel like an MOU or a formal agreement would help clarify your role in this unique situation?
I'm open to discussing some documentation of our shared understanding. What I would suggest is, with all due respect, that we're in a situation where we're discussing personnel matters and it's an eligible topic for being conducted in an executive session. And so before I get into too much more detail, I'd offer that I'd be more willing to discuss it in that setting or in written form.
Okay.
Point.
Great. Thank you, Rod. Marcia, go ahead. And then I do want to sort of come back to the recruitment services conversation, and then, we could, then I want to come back to that. Go ahead, Marcia.
So this is I agree, if a person is taking on extra responsibilities, they should be paid more. But I also think that it's not optional which statutes we decide to abide by. And I don't understand why we wouldn't abide by any of them. So I don't think, I think that Rod's absolutely right. This should be an executive session. And I don't think it's too onerous to have a CV And if he had a credit check before, I agree, we don't need to have another one, but we don't know. We didn't hire him. So
Okay.
I would like to follow through and follow the law.
Okay, the only thing I will say, Marcia, to that is I have followed the law. I've read the statute and I had vetted Rod in my decision when I made my vote.
Well,
Okay.
that didn't give us the benefit of it, and you're not the entire board. With all due respect.
I didn't vet any documents. I went through the very vague process that the statute defines and made my decision accordingly. So I personally don't appreciate you suggesting that this board or any board members are in violation of the law. I don't think our review has done that.
I'm asking for what the law says we should have. May we have it?
I think you're offering a legal interpretation of the statute.
Well, could
the
we
other-
please ask our lawyer?
We could also, you could bring it up as a motion, Marcia. You might clear it up better.
I probably wouldn't. I think I would be a lone vote as usual.
Oh.
So
Well,
I'm happy.
It's okay to be alone. It's okay to be a lone vote. You know,
I know,
because-
I'm used to it.
No, I think it's really good. You know, if you call it a minority vote. But then we won't be going in circles.
Thank you, Mary, for pointing out that we're going in circles. So I would like to move on to what I consider to be the topic, which is feedback on the recruitment services that we are undertaking. I heard curiosity from Rob and MRI. I have curiosity on Rob and MRI, but it seems like the majority of the board is in favor of VLCT or at least inviting them to our next meeting. Is that fair to say? Go ahead, Claudette. Did you have a point?
So I move that we
Authorize.
direct our select board chair to set up an interview with the proposed candidate for the interim town manager position to be held the first meeting of September if possible, and if not, at a date to be determined. That's one
second.
motion.
Okay.
I second that.
Seconded by Mary. Any further discussion? All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Thank you.
I'd
Claudette.
like to make another motion.
Please.
I move that that the board authorize the initiation of a search process to hire an interim town manager into contract with VLCT. There's a caveat to that, though. I want, if there's been no progress in 6 months, that we consider MRI.
Okay, I second it.
Okay, any further discussion?
Can I ask what the last vote was? Can you read it back? Mhm.
Miranda, would you like to read back our last motion, if that would be, if you're able to do that? I
Yes.
could paraphrase, but I think you took the motion.
Yes. Give me just a sec.
Sure.
Okay. Pardon me. Brochu moved to authorize, sorry, wrote down the wrong person, moved it. Okay. Move to authorize the initiation of a search process to hire an interim town manager and to contract with VLCT with the proviso that if no progress is made in 6 months, then the select board will revisit the process. Is that accurate, Brochu?
For the second one it is.
Will consider contracting with MRI is what I believe I said.
Okay, great.
I'm sorry, Miranda. I was asking about the one that we just voted.
Okay.
That was the one that we just voted.
No,
didn't.
not before that.
We haven't
That's
done
the
it.
one that's on the table. All right, give me a sec.
I move that we authorize the
Yeah.
select board chair to initiate
set up-
discussion.
Yeah, to set up an interview with the prospective interim manager candidate at the first September select board meeting or
Or at
the,
a date to be determined.
or at the first available opportunity. Is that
And
right, Claudette? Okay,
Thank you.
And we all voted in affirmative on that. Okay,
correct. You used unanimous,
yeah.
if I understood correctly.
Yeah.
Okay, you good?
Okay, so, yes, thank you, Miranda. So now we have the motion that's on the table now is what Miranda just read back to us, which was to contract with VLCT with the proviso that we will revisit in 6 months with MRI. So
Is there a second? to
is
that?
there a second? Well,
Yeah, I seconded that.
Mary seconded
Yeah,
it.
right, yeah.
Okay, any further discussion?
So
Brenda?
I think 6 months is a long time, and I'm kind of afraid it could go that long. So I understand for some reason there's a reluctance to share for the board to be able to look at qualifications, but I'll call the town attorney and ask what he thinks, because I want us to be safe.
Marcia, I'm not sure I understand, excuse me, Roger, for interrupting. I don't think anybody is saying that when we go for the search for a permanent position, that we would bypass any of the statutory requirements. So I'm not sure what you're saying here.
What I'm saying is, I see a very distinct change. We have a town manager who's gone as of the end of August. After that, we have no agreement with anybody, nothing in writing. We haven't examined anybody's credentials for that job, as apparently is required. And I want to make sure if something again happens, like has just happened in Peterborough, that nobody can turn to us and say, you didn't follow the basic regulation. And I think the board has to acknowledge that. And if the board doesn't want to acknowledge it, then I think we should get town council to tell us it's okay to ignore that.
Marcia, we have a motion on the table.
Right, this motion that's on the table has absolutely nothing to do with what your comments just suggested.
I'd like to call the question, please.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to call a question.
I'm calling the question. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, great. So I'm going to reach out to VLCT. They may wish to make a presentation on their proposal, but I have the authorization to tell them we would like to begin. That's my understanding of that. Okay, so now I would, I think we accomplished what I set out to do in this agenda item, or what I imagine would be done in the agenda item. Can we move on?
Yes.
Yeah, we're done. Yeah.
Okay. Let's, thank you. So let's, item number 10 is the IT vendor and IT upgrades. So board will authorize IT vendor recommendations and authorize expenditures from designated funds. How about we begin with the motion? Is that what I'm seeing with your hand, Claudette?
Yes, sir. I move to authorize the town manager to execute a 3-year contract with CCI Managed Services according to their quotes and proposal, and to authorize the expenditure of funds from the General Administration Designated Fund for the purposes identified in said quotes and proposal.
I'll second it.
Second. No, I want to second it.
You want to do that? Oh, yeah, you should do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Remove my second. You worked so hard on it, Rob.
No, not that hard. but-
Okay, made by Claudette, seconded by Rob. Any further discussion? Go ahead, Marcia.
So Rob, I'm just wondering, I'm used to using VPN. And I'm just wondering, it seemed to me that from my read of this voluminous material, there was only one company that talked about using a VPN. So I'm just wondering if you think that there's something, the other things that they've suggested are significant enough to take care of things. And I'm a little worried about ticketing systems, having used those in the past, and especially this one seems to have tiers. So having used tiered systems before, I know it's a bit frustrating sometimes. And I don't know Is it all right to bring up these particulars? Because it wasn't clear from the presentation that that we were supposed to talk about particulars or not. Because
Well, let me, thank you, Marcia, because I think there was a concern that discussing some of the particulars may make us expose some vulnerabilities. So I'm going to actually turn to Rod has his hand up because I know he assisted with this proposal, and then Herb's here too. So any advice on what we can discuss, or maybe you're answering the question? Go ahead, Rod, I see your hand.
I wasn't sure if Herb was there. It's a weird limitation of real life that I can't see him now because I'm on Zoom. So
Herb is definitely here, but go ahead.
okay.
Go ahead.
So I'll try and do this as collaboratively as possible with Herb, so he can jump in whenever he feels a need. But in general, the item that you have before you is a recommendation from the town manager on the basis of a small group of people that was involved in the request for proposals, and that was a competitive process. So to tease apart the details of this proposal without actually then doing the same with all the other proposals is somewhat problematic, as both Rob and Roger alluded to. And Herb can talk to that in more detail about how you're supposed to discuss a topic such as this in this setting at this point in the process. So I would say in general that you've got a recommendation from the town manager for one of the respondents, and you know, I guess you can ask us, because Rob and I and Jerry Tolman is also on the Zoom call. So the entire small group that reviewed and interviewed the respondents to the proposal are all here. But I would just caution that comparisons or detailed scrutiny of one proposal versus another when the others aren't present could present some vulnerabilities because you're in the process of awarding a contract to a provider.
So how about Marcia asks her question, and then with everyone's insights into this proposal can let us know if that's something you can answer in public session, given that it might make us vulnerable. So Marcia, do you want to go ahead and ask your question? How about that? Or
Yeah.
concern?
It's difficult to VPN.
Okay. I'm happy for Jerry and Rob and others to engage. I'll take a stab at that. Some of the respondents identified VPN, some of them didn't. All spent considerable time in their presentations to the group and in their written submissions, detailing the ways in which they maintain security that met the requirements as specified in the RFP document or went beyond that. So each of them had a slightly different mix, if you like, of services and products that they use to ensure that. CCI, in coming to the conclusion, the group identified CCI as being strong with regard to the response to security questions. So, which is what the VPN would do. A virtual private network is one way of attempting to insulate an organization from malicious attack from the outside via the web. So, and then if I can quickly jump in and talk about tiered services, there was one much smaller organization that had a very relaxed approach to tiered help desk, but all the other respondents that we interviewed had some version of a help desk and some version of a ticketing system in terms of identifying the urgency and seriousness of the issue and what kind of response it would precipitate. So there was, again, the group concluded that CCI's ticketing system was met the requirements as again as spelled out in the RFP, and the people that reviewed their submission along with others found their explanation and their description of the way that system worked to be more than adequate and preferred compared to the other respondents.
Good, Marcia. Does that help at all?
Sort of. What I was also just going to mention was, without saying more, choice of law.
Choice of, I'm sorry.
Sometimes.
I'm not sure I understand what your remark means.
It means that contracts often specify in what state any disputes will be litigated. And so I was just hoping that somebody had thought about that, because it is specified.
In what geographic state?
Yes, in what
Martha?
jurisdiction? My understanding is that any dispute resolution would be resolved in Vermont.
You're wrong.
Well, what is your understanding, Marcia?
Well, I don't want to, I feel hampered by what we're not supposed to say, but not Vermont.
Oh, well, they're a New Hampshire registered business, but they operate in both Vermont and New Hampshire. I don't recall the contents of their dispute resolution language offhand.
It's in there. It's in there.
Okay.
Marcia, would you, if you would feel more comfortable, if you want, in order for you to consider this agenda item, if you would like to make a motion to enter executive to ask your questions, I am happy to hear it.
It's probably worth doing. So
Okay.
I would make a motion to enter executive session to discuss. I don't have the statute in front of me because I need a particular.
You need a
You would need
particular
to
one.
make a finding, right?
Yeah, just before you do, Roger, Jerry Tolman, who's not likely to join you in executive session, has his hand up.
Okay, so why don't, Marcia, if you would like to assure, if you would like to make sure your questions are addressed and you have concerns about, if you would like to make a public finding, we'll take Jerry's comments, and then I assume you'll look up the statute.
Yep.
Go ahead, Jerry.
Hi.
Thank you. Welcome.
First, on the subject of the VPN, I don't think that there was anything in the CCI response that precluded them using a VPN as a solution. It may just not have been specifically outlined as such. I think a lot of the security that is gained by use of a VPN will instead be replaced with the use of cloud services for Office 365, where people, instead of dialing in or into the server, would be doing their work on the cloud. As far as the tiered services go, I think in reading the CCI proposal, they showed a very broad level of expertise among a number of different people that they had prepare the response. And the impression that at least I got from our interview with them is that the tiered service, the tiered system is fine, but if somebody doesn't have the answer to it right away, they move to a different person within the organization.
Mm-hmm.
So,
okay. Thank you.
I must say that their response was far and away better than any of the others.
Thank you, Jerry.
Yeah.
Claudia, did you have a question? And then we'll.
Just a comment that I've worked in organizations that have tiered systems and ticketing systems, and you really never know until you're there and experiencing what the help calls consist of. But having, at least having somebody answering a phone and being relatively local, I'd say is a really big plus.
Right. Thank you, Claudia. Go ahead, Rod, did you have a?
So page 11 of 24 of CCI's proposal actually does indicate that if there was a jurisdiction and venue of enforcement, that it would be Sullivan County, New Hampshire. I don't know what our general disposition is as an organization with regard to entering into contracts with vendors from other states, but I hazard a guess that when we buy equipment and obtain services in the Upper Valley, that we're frequently engaging in crossing the border to do that. So and it's not uncommon for council in Vermont to be a member of the New Hampshire bar as well. It's a good question, and I don't know what the town's disposition on it is, but I want to confirm that Masha is correct. But it would be something for the town to balance in terms of what the risks were and what that would then entail.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the page numbers and the references and the answer to the question. Any further discussion, Marcia? If you would like to make your motion in order to ask your questions, I'll hear that.
Well, it sounds from what Jerry said that VPNs are a possibility if we wanted to do it. I don't know if it would involve more money. And as long as the town understands that it's, a choice of law situation. I don't know that we need to go into executive session unless people are concerned and we want to talk in more depth.
Thank you for bringing it up. I'd just like to move on.
So Herb just said Herb pointed out the discussion of choice of law doesn't necessarily have to, it's not necessarily an executive session, but you have also reiterated, Marcia, that it's a question of whether or not people share your concerns. And I'm not necessarily hearing one way or another. So, okay. Does any other further discussion, any response to the response?
I'd like to just call a question.
Okay, let's call a question. All in favor, please raise your hands. Okay, thank you. Thank you for this. Thank you to everyone who reviewed this proposal, Jerry, Rob, and Herb. Obviously there's a lot of thought, a lot of proposals, a lot of corralling of individuals and benefiting from everyone's experiences and point of view and expertise. So thank you for doing that. I think we are well situated now. We will no longer have Windows XP. Let us celebrate. Let us celebrate. No more Windows XP. Okay. This next agenda item would, if it's possible.
Can I just interrupt? I just wonder if we have some kind of timeline about when the work will start.
Herb alluded to this in email message, but go ahead. Pretty immediately, right? In September?
Right. So as soon as we get, basically this will be beginning in September. As soon as I can get, if I can sign something before I leave, I'll do that. If not, we'll be getting Rod to sign something as soon as possible so that these guys can get going and get the equipment that's in here. If there's any sort of thing that we need to do, the first thing we need to do is replace the server and the 3 workstations that are way out of date. But because we're now in the new fiscal year, we have the benefit of doing everything. So if we can make a sort of a bulk order and get it all in here, we will. But again, this is something that we should be beginning to implement as soon as possible in September. and the guys are, the CCI understands that and is excited to start jumping on board.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you for that question, Claudette. Okay, on the next item on the agenda is a possible executive session to discuss and address some concerns that were brought forward to this board. Someone want to make some motions to do so?
Okay, I've noticed that I'm thinking that's a proper citation, 1 VSA section 313(3). Under that section, I move to enter executive session to consider the appointment or employment or evaluation of a public officer or employee.
I don't, so I don't necessarily know if that's the motion that we would.
Well, this is motion that's on the motion sheet, so I'm not quite sure of how this was framed or why the motion sheet is like that.
I'm going to ask, so, yes, so this motion sheet was, it says possible executive personnel, and we're giving a motion that closely matches that description. I think in our agenda setting process, I think something else might be better suited. I think that requires a finding, I believe.
Or what topic? I mean, it's not this topic, obviously. That one would be, appointment or employment of or evaluation of public officer. There are many others. There's contracts, labor relations.
Okay.
Get number 4.
Yep.
Let's see number 4, disciplinary or dismissal action against a public officer or employee.
Yeah, it's pretty open.
So that's different than what you had, what your motion was, is that right?
Yeah, I mean, yes. I mean, the motion on the motion sheet, without any citation this time, the motion said, is there a motion to enter executive session to consider the appointment or employment or evaluation of a public officer or employee? So that's how it is on the motion sheet.
I understand how it was on the motion sheet. I am raising the question of whether or not that is the nature of our executive session as presented to us in the agenda setting process. And if not, then not. But
I think it was actually 1 VSA 3134.
I believe that's more appropriate but I need some.
You want to make the motion, Marcia,
Okay,
based on that?
I can.
Okay.
I move that we move into executive session under 1 VSA 313, paragraph 4.
And I think you have to describe it a little bit.
Which is what? Sorry.
Disciplinary or dismissal action.
Against,
Okay.
for review of a disciplinary or dismissal action against a public officer or employee.
Okay. Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, made by Marcia, seconded by Mary. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay. Is that all that is required for this?
Yeah, I think it's a one stage.
Okay, so so we made the motion, I'm going to enter into executive session. And I'm going to put folks into the waiting room, okay? And I'm going to physically leave. Okay, so I'm going to do that now.
I move to enter public session.
Second,
Hold on.
We heard it? Okay. What was that?
So I didn't hear, I'm sorry, I didn't hear the motion. Is there a motion to enter a public session?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second,
Okay, seconded by Rob, made by Mary. All in favor, please raise your hand. Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
I move to adjourn.
second,
All in, seconded by Marcia, made by Mary. All in favor, please raise your hand. Thank you, 10:33. Have a good night. Thank you, everyone.
good night.
all right.
Roger.